Good morning, everyone. I'm Gina Boss, the Deputy Director for the Center for Transportation Studies, and as always, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the 27th Annual Freight and Logistics Symposium. I see many familiar faces out here today, but also some new ones, so thank you for coming out in this chilly weather to share information and discuss today's topic, AI-powered freight, revolutionizing transportation and logistics. I was very happy to, as I watched the weather this week, to see that we weren't going to have snow or ice, which, again, for those of you who have attended this event over the years, we have occasionally run into that challenge. So, cold, I think we can manage. So before we jump into today's program, I do want to acknowledge several organizations who support this event and help by helping to plan the program and to market the symposium. So they are, of course, MnDOT, and I want to thank Commissioner Nancy Dobbenberger and Deputy Commissioner Gene Wallace for being here this morning, the Minnesota Freight Advisory Committee, the Metropolitan Council, and the Council of Supply Chain Management Professionals, Twin Cities Roundtable. In addition, I'd like to ask the members of the Planning Committee for this event to stand, and please help me thank them for their efforts in putting together today's program. We definitely could not do this without them. So as we were discussing ideas for this year's symposium, words like technology, productivity, efficiency, and disruption kept rising to the top. We finally honed in on artificial intelligence applications for freight as the featured topic. And in fact, we actually used AI to come up with the title for the symposium. So, starting to put it into practice. So I know many of you have a good understanding of what AI is and how it is being used to advance business cases in areas like safety and productivity. But if you are like me, this is not your day-to-day area of expertise. So we felt it was really important to start with some knowledge building before jumping into the discussions about how it is being used by the private sector and how legislators are thinking about policy and regulatory considerations. So we're going to get started I'll give just a little bit of a rundown. We're going to get started with our keynote presentation, and I will introduce our speaker in just a minute. Following his presentation, Mike is going to join me and our two panelists for a discussion following up, hitting on in more depth on some of the things that Mike is going to share, but also hear from them what their own experiences are within the industry. And we are going to leave time for questions, so be thinking about the questions that you might want to have for our panelists. And then after the break, Kyle Shelton, who's the director of CTS, is going to moderate we're calling it a fireside chat. Unfortunately, we don't have a fireplace in here, but we'll just make do. With Representative Steve Elkins and State Senator Jordan Rasmussen to hear a little bit about how they're thinking about AI and how it's being used from their perspective as elected officials and policymakers. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce our opening speaker today. Mike Watson is the co-founder and CEO of OPEX Analytics, an AI firm that grew to employ 140 data scientists from 2013 to 2019. In 2020, OPEX Analytics was acquired by Coupa. I think I'm saying that right. At Coupa, Watson led the AI Center of Excellence until December 2021. And then he decided to join us in the world of academia. So he is now a full-time faculty member at Northwestern University, where he has taught since 1999, teaching master's level courses in operations excellence, managerial analytics, and optimization. Mike has his PhD from Northwestern and is the lead author of a couple of books, Supply Chain Network Design and Managerial Analytics. Please join me in welcoming Mike. Thank you.
Well, thank you for inviting me to the conference. What I want to do today is kind of just talk about what leaders need to know about AI. And I think as Gina mentioned, I was kind of lucky. I got a nice front row seat on watching this whole field evolve. Like, go back 15 or 20 years ago, no one even talked about machine learning. And then all of a sudden machine learning popped up, and I was lucky to be able to hire like fresh data scientists coming out of these programs to sort of see what was going on. So what I want to do today is kind of give you a framework for like how to think about AI. Like what I find most confusing to people is that the term AI is just tossed around and people are using it in many different ways. And so I want to give us a framework for thinking about what is it when they say AI, what do they actually mean? And my goal is like just getting everyone on the same page, and as we go, like give some different ideas, like what are some other sources, other books, other things to read, think about, sort of to get to know this space better. And hopefully it'll come across. I love the field of AI. I love using data and technology to solve problems. And hopefully this is a way to sort of help think about like, how do we think about it in a different way? So what I'm going to do is give 4 definitions of AI. So when someone says AI, what I think is they mean like one of 4 things. And so we'll go through each of those. And the first one I'm going to start with is like the bigger picture one. This is sometimes when people say AI, what they mean is artificial general intelligence. And this came from right when the roots of this started was, back in 56 or whatever, this group of scientists got together and said, we're going to make machines think just like people. And this is what they meant by AI. Of course, they didn't solve it back then. You'll also see things like the singularity. So you'll hear this term. It's like, this is the point, what's the purple and the red line is how smart computers are. And the singularity is the point where these computers get smarter than people, and then they start making the next generation of computers and gets even smarter and smarter. So hear that. That is coming from this particular term. If you want another view of this, I really like following Melanie Mitchell. She wrote this book before ChatGPT came out and kind of revised it since then. And it's a great read. Like if you're kind of worried about machines taking over, like if you read her stuff, I think you'll come away at least with a different point of view, thinking like, all right, machines might not be that close to taking over the world yet, and why we might be far away. And so, when people are using this term, like how do I advise people in freight and logistics like to think about this? And my main tip is like, I think you can mostly safely ignore this field. Like you can think about it just kind of on the side, but it has no applications for businesses at this point, and it's still a research area. And I think the other key thing is just we're not here yet, and it's not clear, how far away we are. We may be, many years away from getting anywhere close to this. So that's one definition. So first definition, AI means AGI. Second definition, in this definition, people use the term AI to mean I'm using some of these new algorithms, specifically these deep neural networks, so you'll hear that term. I'm using these algorithms to solve hard problems. And basically the hard problems that they're solving are self-driving vehicles, robotics, things like protein folding, things that involve like seeing, speaking, reading, those kinds of things. A good source for this is I'll reference this guy a couple times, Andre Karpathy. So he did this podcast talking about basically self-driving cars and his work at Tesla and other things. He called these things AGI for self-driving. I think he was a little overambitious. So I think what he meant is, or how I interpret it is that he thinks we're getting very, very close to having autonomous vehicles that don't need human interaction and actually drive much better than people. Like that can be argued, but he wasn't making the claim that that the latest version of Tesla is smart in other things besides driving. He had also made a point that as we see progression in self-driving vehicles, we should also expect to see some of that transfer over into robotics. Like that's going to be an interesting field to watch. He sees a lot of potential, so he thinks these models have a lot further to go in the things that they can do. So it's definitely an area to watch. And when I talk to supply chain, freight, logistics folks, this is a particular area that I think people should pay attention to. So as autonomous vehicles get better and better, as robotics get better and better, this is going to have impact on the business world. So let's definitely keep an eye out for this. The other thing that I think about with this is that most normal companies probably shouldn't be investing in the core technology that does this stuff. I've run into, it may be less so now, but I've run into lots of companies that are building a data science team, and they tend to have a lot of deep experts at these deep learning algorithms. And kind of what I find is a little bit of overkill. It's like this technology feels like it's left to, a few larger firms who can really invest hundreds of millions of dollars in the data science team, in the IT infrastructure to make this kind of stuff work. This is not like a normal company won't go out and create robots that are human-like and can do different business tasks. So that's the second definition. In the third definition, so this is the one that everyone talks about. So everyone at this point knows ChatGPT and LLMs sort of took over the world, took over the sort of popular imagination. And so a lot of times when people say AI at this point, what they mean is they mean these large language models. So ChatGPT was the first, but now I think people realize that there's lots of these different models out there. So this is kind of what they mean. And coming back again, so if you're new to this space and you sort of want a primer on this 1 hour video by Andre Karpathy is a good introduction. He kind of talks about like what are these models, how do they work, and so what's important from our point of view, I think, is if we think about the conceptual of how they work, they have these kind of two stages. One is stage one where it's pre-trained. This is basically taking anything that's ever been written, so the whole corpus of all written knowledge, and creating these models. So that's, I think, the least interesting part for a business point of view. And the more interesting part is the second, where you do this fine-tuning, and where you have a team of people who actually fine-tune the first model to get the answers. And this is what we interact with as consumers. But what it also means is that there'll be other kinds of applications that pop up. So as over time, what you can expect is that there'll be more freight, more logistics, more supply chain specific applications as these large models get pre-trained or get fine-tuned with very specific things for specific industries. So it's definitely an area to kind of keep your eye on for that. So let me talk about LLM business ideas and sort of some ways to think about it. So I really like this book. It's like one of my go-to recommendation books is Prediction Machines. It was written before LLMs came out, but the idea is still the same. And it was written by a group of economists. So they had kind of a different view on how they looked at the world of artificial intelligence. And their basic framework is thinking like, as a technology gets cheaper, what else does that make cheaper? So it's kind of thinking of that along those lines. So, and if it's cheaper, we're going to do more of it. And so, as their original thing was predictions. So prediction algorithms got cheaper and cheaper. So we're going to do more and more of that. And they had some creative ideas in the book. So one of them was, if something gets a lot cheaper, we're going to find new uses for this technology. And their cool example is basically chips. When the first computers came out, they did basically computation. And originally, they were pretty expensive, and everyone thought, well, what's the big computation thing? It's just accounting. And so everyone's like, well, computers are going to do accounting, and that's probably it. But then they point out that as computation got cheaper and cheaper, so the chips got much, much, much cheaper. And all of a sudden, it turns out sending an email is computation. Turns out taking a picture on your phone is computation. It opened up all these new business opportunities. And they think the same idea is going to happen with AI in the sense of AI predictions or even LLMs. And then they had also another, creative idea in the book that's sort of grounded in business is that, by the way, like a lot of problems that we solve are prediction problems. Like business is full of prediction problems, and if you start thinking about sort of the day-to-day things that go on in a business and the processes you go through, it's like, you're actually making a lot of predictions. So that's a framework. Now let's pull it to LLMs. And so, what got cheaper with I'll use ChatGPT and LLMs kind of interchangeably. The same thing. It's like, I think at this point we sort of have got a sense of like, these are the things that it's gotten better. It helps us write, helps us code, read, summarize, etc. So I'll point out a few things that I think are important when I talk to supply chain, freight, and logistics groups. One is that the coding part is like, don't underestimate this for your analysts and planners. It's sort of, what this has done is it's basically, the way I like the framework I like to think about it is it's basically upskilled your workforce, like think 1 to 3 levels. So on a sort of imaginary scale of 1 to 10 of how good you are at sort of coding and technology, it sort of brings you up 1 to 3 levels. So it doesn't make you, if you're a novice, it doesn't make you a production grade coder. But if you're a novice, it makes you a little bit better because it breaks down some of the syntax errors. And it's one of the interesting stories I like with this one is that I teach, one of the classes I teach has master's level students who are sort of coming back sort of mid-career. I had a guy in the class who was kind of mid-30s. He'd run basically runs and builds chemical plants. And for whatever reason, he was coming back to grad school. And the first day of my class, after class, he came up and he said, I think I might have to drop the class. I'm like, why are you going to drop the class? He goes, it looks like there's Python in here. And he basically said, like, at this point in my career, I'm like, I used to code, but I'm too old to code, and I'm too old to learn to code again. Like, I'm not going to do that. And I begged him. I said, look, it's not really a Python class, but stay in the class. I think you'll get some stuff out of it. And I think he listened to me for whatever reason, and then he stayed in the class. Class goes on. After the last class, just chatting with him at the end of class. And I'm like, yeah, what did you like most about the class? I wasn't even thinking about that first conversation. He said, what I liked the most was the Python coding. And I'm like, man, you told me you were going to drop the class because of that. What happened? And he's like, with ChatGPT, he said it just broke down all the barrier. He could just put whatever snippets of code we used, put it in there, and it immediately told him what it was doing. And so it didn't make him a great programmer, but it did raise him, this 1 to 3 levels. And so I think we have to think like that. And then the second tip I like to point out to different groups is like, how do you use this? Like, we want to think of these tools as like tireless, happy interns. And interns is important words for thinking about their skill level. And the tip I like to give, and I've fallen into this trap too, is that we can't treat this like a human. So it's very tempting when you're talking to ChatGPT, it feels like there's a person on the other end. And so what problems does that cause? So, if I'm talking to you, and you tell me something, I can ask a clarifying question, like, well, can you explain that again? And you're happy to answer that one. If I ask for another clarifying question, now it's getting a little socially awkward. And if I ask you like a fourth time to clarify again the same thing, it's a really weird thing going on between people. And so we have to break that. We don't have a human on the other end of this ChatGPT, and so you have to feel confident that you can ask it again and again and in different ways. And that's, I think, how you get the most out of it. I've found myself falling into that trap. I'll ask twice, and like, it's not exactly what I'm looking for, but I don't want to bug it again. I'm like, I don't know, it's just a machine on the other side. So keep that in mind as you're thinking about this. And then, we were talking about this a little bit before this kicked off. It's like, what gets more valuable too is you sort of have to know what you're looking for too. So expertise doesn't leave. Like, you have to screen this stuff, and this gets more valuable even though this stuff up there gets cheaper. A good person to follow is Ethan Mollick. So he's prolific exploring this LLM space. So if you're interested in this, Ethan Mollick, he's out of UPenn. He's very active on LinkedIn. He's very active on Twitter. He's got an active blog. But what he's doing is thinking about how does this stuff apply to business. So he's doing a really good job of this. This graph is kind of one of the early famous graphs talking about like how good is this technology. He worked with, I think, Boston Consulting Group and Harvard and MIT and a couple others to do this study. And the basis of the graph was they gave a bunch of consultants some tasks, and the quality is like how good it is. And the blue was like, they didn't get to use any tools like ChatGPT, and then the green and red did. And the green, there was this nice shift, and like the people who used the tool could see some improvements in some specific areas. So it was starting to sort of put some science to this. It's like, is this making people more productive? And he's a good guy to follow on this to sort of keep up with how that's going. So also on the LLMs, the other thing I advise is for people to watch the trends. Like, this space moves like really fast. And it's some of the stuff I'm saying right now is probably already updated. Like, there's probably something in my social media feeds that say, there's some new technology that's popped up. So ChatGPT is a big one. With one of the big features, they added vision. This was a big feature that popped up. Instead of just having text, they took pictures. I had one of my students tell me that it was, we could, if I gave them an assignment, they could type in the assignment, and then ChatGPT would give an answer. If they took a picture of the same question, it actually answered it better. And he was speculating that it was sort of picking up things that that the text couldn't capture. I'm not sure if that's exactly right, but it was pretty interesting how like a feature like that sort of raised the ability of the tool to do things. I think we have to keep an eye on that. The other, people know this at this point, is adding your own files for knowledge. So this is a pretty popular use case. So I did a test with this and stuck my book up there and sort of let created a little tutor, and I gave it to my students. And I had a student this term, and I kind of did an experiment, and they could use this as a tutor to help them with homework, whatever they wanted. And he did a comparison of how well did this work with the book versus just ChatGPT in general. And he said, yeah, definitely lifted it up. So sort of combining your knowledge with these LLMs is going to be, I think already a thing of the future. And then a big one, and this is going to be important in logistics and supply chain, is this. If they can figure this out, is how do you do these self-improvement loops, and how do you give the LLM some kind of reward function? And so think of reward as like an objective or something like that. So the point that they make is that these developers know, like when you ask an LLM a question, its goal is basically, can I give you an answer like right away? So it spits right an answer. And so instead what they're thinking is, can I tell the LLM the question, give it some kind of objective measure to say, this is what I'm trying to do, and then have another sentence in there that says, by the way, take all night to figure this out. And so the idea is that it goes back and forth and iterates and sort of comes up with different answers, looks at that reward, is it getting better or worse, and continues that, and then maybe in the morning I've got some answer. And this could be interesting from the field that we're all in. It's like, can I start to solve some problems like as a person would? And so it's not here yet, but people are definitely thinking about this. And it's like, if we can do this, now these LLMs can analyze situations, analyze models, build models for us. There's lots of possibilities if this becomes true. And for sure, technology or companies are working on this. Like, can I get this technology embedded into these products? Okay, so that's 3 definitions. So when people say AI, they can mean AGI, just general intelligence. They could mean just deep learning solving hard problems. They could mean LLMs. But we're still missing something, I feel like. I feel like we need this 4th one. Because you'll go talk to companies, you'll read press releases, you'll talk to the media. People will use the term AI, and it's none of those 3 things. It's something else. And if you look at these books, so I've already talked about this one. It's using the term AI, and this was before LLMs were even around. So it was honing in on something else. And what it is I think there's a 4th definition, is that sometimes when people say AI, what they mean is practical AI. Or there's some other definitions, but I'm going to term it practical AI. And what is practical AI? It's more than just these algorithms. So these are the ones that get a lot of attention as being new, the deep learning and reinforcement learning. This is what's behind your self-driving cars. This is what's behind ChatGPT. But it also means all these other algorithms that anyone who's been in this field for a long time has used and seen these kind of algorithms. Like when people use the term AI, they, in general, in the media and business in general, they mean this whole collection of different algorithms. They're not solving the hardest self-driving problems. They're not chatbots, but they're doing something interesting with data to come up with answers that are hard otherwise. And you can argue that these things don't belong in the definition of AI, and I'm okay with that. Like I'll grant you that is probably true. But what I'm saying with this point is that this is how, if you go talk to a consultant, if you go read an ad for a company that has this kind of technology, when they say AI, they might mean all this kind of stuff. And so my goal is clear communication here, not necessarily categorizing everything perfectly. And so what do we understand about this, or what's some points on this, is that some people just call this AI, like I talked about. Sometimes instead of practical is kind of my definition, but others you'll see weak AI or narrow AI, and it's kind of referring to this area. And if you've been in this field long enough, I think we talked about this too at breakfast, is that if you go back to just 2017, the things that people are now calling AI, we used to call predictive and prescriptive analytics. Like that whole group of technologies got sort of swallowed up into the AI term, and no one uses those terms anymore. Everyone just says AI because it's a lot cooler. The reason, the analytics popped up with this competing on analytics from Davenport. So if you go back to like 2002, we wouldn't even have used the term analytics. So it sort of came and went quickly. And then, like if you go back 2015, like analytics was the hot term. Like a conference like this, it would have been about analytics, not AI. That would have been what we were talking about. And then, what I thought was funny, my whole life I've been in this kind of field doing this stuff, and we were always taught to like use normal terms because you'll scare away the business people. And then all of a sudden, business people were using terms like machine learning and data scientists. I'm like, wow, something has shifted in the world. But all falling under this term. And just, this might be a refresher for some or new to others. It's like, I think it's important to talk about what we mean by learning too, because this is kind of some interesting term that popped up out of this field. And I'll just do it with a simple case study. So let's say we wanted to automate quality checks on potato chips. So we make potato chips and want to figure out if a potato chip is good or bad. And so we want to do this automatically. So we're going to take pictures of the potato chip and figure out how to tell if it's good or not. So there's two basic ways to automate this. The first one, which is not learning, is rules-based. So what we do is get a bunch of potato chip quality engineers in a room on a chalkboard, write all the different rules down, all the math equations for what defines a good potato chip and a bad potato chip. So we have to go through that rigmarole, and then we get that system. It works. Rules-based systems are around. They're still exist. But the big problem with this is that there's too many rules. It's too hard to scale. You still miss a lot of edge cases, so it's just a tricky thing. And then, if you've gone through one of these, the problem is then you say, well, we just did it for regular potato chips. Let's do it for barbecue. It's like you're just not going to get the people in the room to write those equations. They're like, we're tired of that. That's a lot of work. Can we do it in a more efficient way? And this is where learning came in the term learning. And so what learning means here in this context is that we're going to just feed the machine pictures of the potato chips, and then we're just next to each picture, we're just going to say good or bad. I don't give any formulas. I don't give any reasons. I just say this one's good, this one's bad, this one's good. And then the machine itself can then sort of go through there and figure out the characteristics that it thinks are important to define a good and bad one. It doesn't necessarily tell us what those are, but it has a mechanism to say if I give it a new potato chip without a label, without saying it's good or bad, it'll sort of look at the others and make this classification. And that's what we mean by learning. And so the other thing you'll hear about with learning is this idea of continuous learning. Is like you can imagine if you want to make this algorithm better, you just feed it more pictures of potato chips and say it's good or bad. So I think that's a good idea. But my tip for people in industry, if you're at a management level, it's like it's easy to fall into the trap to think this learning is just automatic. Just because I call it machine learning, that this thing gets smarter and smarter. And the big lesson I've seen here is that you really want to make sure that you understand the mechanism for how this thing is actually getting smarter. Because a lot of these algorithms, they won't naturally get smarter. They won't naturally pull in new data to make decisions, and some of them will drift over time and get worse. And so you have to stay on top of this to make sure these systems are doing what you intend. Okay, a couple tips for thinking about the practical AI is that one is like something like ChatGPT makes these algorithms more accessible. Like it's easier now to do these kind of machine learning algorithms. 5 years ago, you needed a few more coding skills to get them up and running. Now it's a little bit easier. And the other one that I talk about and advise people on think about is that don't let ChatGPT sort of crowd out these algorithms. Like if I think about the freight and logistics field, it's like some of these practical AI algorithms are the ones that are going to have the most impact in this area. And if your organization or your organization is sort of just focused on ChatGPT and not these algorithms, you're going to be missing out on a lot of technology that could help. All right, so that's my framework. It's AI means AGI, could mean deep learning, solving hard problems, could mean ChatGPT or this practical AI. And in fairness, like I want to show this creative framework because I think it's just a different way to think about, and this is around LLMs, a different way to think about LLMs that might open your mind to sort of new possibilities. And it came from Mark Andreessen, and I heard it on this particular podcast. And what he was saying is that back in the 30s, there were sort of two basic ideas, like how do we create a computer? And one of them is think of, a computer is just a calculating machine. How do we make that? And the other was like they knew about neural networks and how they thought the brain worked, and said we can model it after that. So we had these two different approaches. The calculating machine was going to be ultra precise, like it's going to calculate, it's going to be very precise. And the human brain model was going to be a little more fuzzy, but this was going to be better at recognizing images and things like that. And so, you can tell, after the 30s, like who won, like the calculating machine won. So the calculating machine won out. So what do we know about this? Like, I think what's interesting about this is remember how we culturally thought about computers. And I don't know who remembers 1994, but Intel had a bug in their chip. It was a tiny little calculation bug that made a mistake. And this was like a national news story. It was a big scandal for Intel. Like Intel said, like, you know, they weren't going to replace the chip because it wasn't bad enough, or the problem wasn't bad enough, and it was a huge uproar, and I think Intel had to recall a lot of chips. And here was the error. Like, estimated impact 1 in 9 billion calculations. Like, none of us would ever encounter this unless you really worked hard. And here was an example of it where, you know, the stuff in red was the mistake of this chip. And I point this out, not because of this bug, but just because of, like, this is the level of accuracy that we demanded. Like, this is what we thought of our computers. Like, we didn't want this Intel chip to even make 1 in 9 billion mistakes when it was doing some calculations. That's how precise we wanted these machines. And now think about, like, ChatGPT. Like, you know, all the hallucinations and all the stuff that comes out of that, we just completely tolerate it. So it's like, this is like a different mindset. So, you know, now, you know, we have these. Like, by 2012, we sort of figured this out. Like, we've got this model up and running. They're more creative. They do new things, but these errors and hallucinations, part of the bargain. Like, this is what sort of comes with this. And what's the lesson? I think this is the creative part. The creative part is, like, we should think that we have 2 different types of computers. So we should think that, you know, these are 2 different things. So I have ultra precise, and then I have creative, and we shouldn't judge LLMs with precision. Like, you know, there's some meme going around LinkedIn about, you know, ChatGPT couldn't figure out how many R's were in the word strawberry. It's like, it's not built for that. It's not built for that kind of weird precision. It's built for something completely different, and we should sort of separate that in our minds. And the way I think about it from a business point of view is that, you know, if you run a company, you know, you have people that do sales and people who write code, and you shouldn't expect them to sort of do the other thing. It's like, and we should think about the same thing. We have LLMs that do one thing and precision that does another, and how can we marry these together so they're both doing what they want? So I just thought that was kind of a creative framework for thinking about these tools. Okay, make sure, check on the time. Yep, doing okay. Let's talk about the AI factory, digital twins, applications. Like, sort of, how do I apply this? I've got a framework, and now I want to think about some ways to sort of apply this in a business setting or an organization. So I really like this book, Competing in the Age of AI. I think you know, the first 5 chapters are about how it applies within an organization. And then, you know, the back half of the book is more sort of broader questions. So I'm going to focus on the first half just for this talk. And their big idea is that, you know, with this kind of AI technology, in any technology like this, what it does is it allows you to scale. And so what you're looking at, the graph here they like to show is that they have the number of users on the x-axis. So as you increase the number of users, just think, as your business grows, you know, what kind of value do you create? The pink line says as your business grows, if you're more digital and having these AI engines make more decisions, you know, you grow faster, rather than the gray line. As your business gets larger, you have to just add people to solve the problem, and so you don't capture the same amount of value. So that's the promise. And how does this book do it? And so what they like to think about is that, I think the term factory is important, is that they want to think, like, how do you create a lot of different applications? So in any business, any organization, we're making hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of decisions like every day, and how do we start using AI to facilitate that? And they have this kind of this nice approach for the AI factory. It's thinking of, you know, you have to create a data layer, so there has to be a layer where you can pull information in about the business so that all groups can access it. There's an algorithm layer, so this is the brain, so this is where the AI algorithms fit in. Like, how do I make the decisions? How do I make the predictions? So I do that there. And then I need a software layer, so think of this as, like, how do I get this into the hands of the people who actually need it? Like, this is that particular step. So I think it's a nice framework for thinking about, like, all right, how do I actually make this happen? How do I get my organization smarter and taking advantage of AI? You'll hear a lot of CEOs talk about, you know, I want to be AI first. And they're thinking about they have to think about something that looks like this so that their organization can build these algorithms, build and deploy these different algorithms. So where is this coming up? So if you think about the framework, so digital twins, so this was, The Economist did a nice piece on this. The Economist does good articles on digital twins about every 5 years or so. And this was the latest incarnation just a couple months ago, just talking about sort of digital twins are becoming important. So this is the data layer. So companies are starting to realize I need these digital twins of my business, my organization, so that I have this information at my fingertips, helping everything from, you know, manufacturing and distribution to, you know, science and things like that. One of the quotes that they popped up out here was, Amazon talking about their digital twin for their supply chain and their logistics operations. And I think this is a great use case, is that, supply chains are super complicated, data flowing everywhere, and if we can capture this information and share it with the organization, now we can make lots of different decisions with this data source. And then I think, as I think about, freight and logistics and the supply chain field, it's like, I feel like this field has always wanted to be like part of an AI factory. It's like, since I've been in this area, it's like we're always scrounging around for data. We're always building lots of different applications. There's no shortage of problems to solve. So like, how do we think about this is that, from a data point of view, is that, we love to access all that data. And I also thought, what we do in this field too is we end up cleaning data and putting context around it, and other groups could benefit from that. And so if we have this idea of a digital twin and we have this clean data, we can have other groups use it. And then the other thing that logistics and supply chain does a lot of is creates data. A good use case is that when companies want to do analysis, they always want to ask questions about things that they're not currently doing. And this is data that's sort of naturally coming out of a supply chain and logistics group, is how do I understand what are the costs on different lanes, what are the capacity bottlenecks within the freight network, and if we can capture that data and make it part of our digital twin, people within our organization can then use that to sort of evaluate what ifs and see what they need to do different. The algorithm, so this is like the decisions of it, like, the freight and logistics problems have been worked on and solved by people in academia for a long time. So there's a host of algorithms out there. Think about just routing, think about network design and product flow. Like, these algorithms exist. There's good commercial solvers out there. So names like, if you're in this field, names like Garobi or Cplex would pop up. And so what we're seeing now, or what the trend I'm seeing now in this industry is that, your advantage is going to be, can you stitch these together to solve problems that are unique to you? It's like you have all the pieces, and if you have all the data, can you sort of tailor these algorithms to solve your particular problem? And then finally, the software is that, you need different users, need different interfaces. And so how do you get the information into the hands of the people that need it and can make the decisions? I think that's an important part. Let's talk about talent. So how do you think about these groups? How do you grow these groups? And it's, as companies organizations get more sort of data friendly, go more to the AI factory, it's like important to have these groups. And so here's I'm going to talk about it, sort of the fallacy that I see some companies and groups fall into, is that people think about a data scientist or think about an AI scientist, and they think about it like a decathlete. Like, what they're looking for is this person that can do everything. So, gold medal decathlete here, they can do, any Olympic sport, do it well. And so this is what people think about when they're looking for a data scientist. Like, they know the algorithms, they can code, they know data engineering, they're smart to talk to the business. Like, they have this idea of a data scientist. And I think this leads to basically three problems. One is that if you're a leader, you just have the wrong expectation of who the people are going to be on your team. It's just like, this is not who you're going to find. I mean, if you find one of those people, for sure hire them, but it's going to be hard to find them. And then as a leader too, you have to worry about, I might have people in my organization who are good, and if they know I think about data scientists like this, they're not going to raise their hand and sort of volunteer to be in the group. And so you might miss out on people who would contribute to the group. And then sort of the other side of that one from a contributor. So, your young potential data scientists in your organization, is like, they might be hesitant to think they're actually data scientists. They're like, well, I see, some of these people who have all these skills. Like, I'm not gonna try for that. Like, I tell some of my undergrad students that I work with who have good technical skills, I give them this message, because I see a lot of them say, well, I'm not really a data scientist. I'm like, you're fine. Like, you've got this particular niche. So what's a better model? So my better model is this one. So if you've seen Ocean's 11, it's basically like, can you assemble a team of people with very unique skills? And that's what comes together to make a data science team. And so some of the unique skills here would be, at the top, you have you need your algorithm people. Like, there's people who are specialized in these algorithms who know how to make that work. You can't forget about the data engineers, like a different skill set. How do you pull in the data into these applications? You have to eventually build software, so you need software engineers. And then the last two at the bottom tend to be forgotten in these groups, is that you need some product managers and some designers as part of the group. It's like, this stuff just, if you let engineers build a product, I mean, you might have seen the result of that. It doesn't always look the best or isn't friendly to the organization. So you need product managers to kind of help this along. And you need, obviously, the leaders. That's probably an obvious one. Leaders, and I'll talk about the translator in a second here. So you need these different skills. So let's talk about the translator. So this is a role that doesn't pop up in most organizations formally, but it for sure should, I think. And it's this idea of a translator. McKinsey's been talking about this for a long time. The idea of a translator is someone who understands the business really well, understands the algorithms, not like detailed coders, but understands them enough to be able to know what their pros and cons are and can sort of talk to the two groups. And so this is a person kind of in the middle of these two groups. The thing I like to talk about too is that, like, I think this is a role that's accessible to more people than you think. And there's this idea of reverse mentoring, which I hadn't heard until the recent kind of AI boom. And the idea of reverse mentoring is that I'm 54, like I'm not going to be up on the technology, but what I need to do, I got to find someone who's fresh out of school, and they're going to be my mentor. Like I'm going to sit down with them and ask them all the questions. They're going to tell me how this stuff works and what doesn't work, and that's going to be that's going to help my career as well. So it's this idea of sort of reverse mentoring. I think it's applicable in this space. And I think as I look back in my career, I think I've done that a bit. When we had our company, we were hiring people fresh out of school. Like I couldn't keep up with the algorithms, but they could, and so I've made sure I spent a lot of time like understanding like what these possibilities and limitations were, because I had to talk to the business at some point too, and sort of understand and sort of scope out these different projects. And then, I do work to stay on top of the business trends, so it's a space that's moving fast, but I guess I'm giving people permission, like you don't have to understand all the technical details, but if you get the high level, you can kind of stay on top of this. How are we doing on time? I got 5 minutes? All right, I'll do a fun little section. So I want to do this. Should you be worried? So I think this is it's a fun conversation. I do it with my students too, and it's because for sure when people talk about AI, there's always this sort of the scary stuff and that. So if you're thinking about AI, like should you be worried? I think there's two distinct things we should keep in mind. It's like one worry is that humans are going to go extinct. So this is a word like literally extinct. There's people that think that AI, this is a terrible idea that we're building AI and we're literally going to wipe out the human race. And then the other worry is disruptive. So these are two different things, two different worries. They're both legitimate, but they're very different. So let's talk about the first one. So this is my guy for the Will Go Extinct. So he writes popularly about this. What's his theory? His theory is that, if you go back in prehistory, like he says, well, it probably was not a good idea for the Neanderthals to invite the Homo sapiens into the campfire. Like that was probably a bad thing for them. And he says the same thing here. Like we should not invite ChatGPT into the campfire. So that's his take. I'll come back to Mark Andreessen. So kind of in reaction to that crowd, he wrote something like AI will save the world, talking about this will only make us smarter, and every technology that's made us smarter is sort of lifted everyone. So you can kind of read the two and sort of see what you think. And then I'll put someone in the middle. This is an economist, and he took a view. He was probably closer to the right, but he wasn't going to make a commitment. But what he did say I thought was pretty interesting is that the people on the left, what he said is that the will go extinct crowd, the doom crowd, he's like, they don't have a scientifically testable hypothesis. So, he compared it to global warming. So no matter what you think about global warming, what he said is like, there's models. And once there's a model, you can poke at the model, test the model, question the assumptions, do whatever you want, but there's a model and a framework for thinking about it. And what he's claiming is there's no such model for the AI is going to take over the world or make humans extinct. So that's that side of it. I'll come back to Melanie Mitchell. I think she's got an interesting point too, is that I would summarize hers as like, what are we even talking about with extinction? She's like, we haven't even defined AGI. We don't know what intelligence is. So it's kind of weird to be thinking about this sort of before we even know what this stuff is. And then, so that's the extinction side, and the other side is, it's disruptive, and it's truly disruptive. Like it is. Like there's going to be privacy issues for sure. There's issues with bias, and this comes up a lot in the public sector, is like what data goes into these algorithms. So you think about, things like sentencing and sort of who gets parole and who doesn't. Like, if your algorithms have weird data in there, you're going to get weird answers. The deep fakes, like, the Pope never wore this jacket. Like, I would have assumed there would have been more deep fakes in the last election cycle we had, but this stuff is for sure coming. Like, it's just going to hit us pretty hard. People are worried about the energy use of this technology. And then there's, of course, the issue of the jobs. Is this going to take jobs? What's that going to do to the economy? My favorite story here is just the ATM. Like, I don't have a strong opinion one way or the other what AI is going to do with jobs, but the ATM, when it came out about 40 years ago, everyone said bank tellers are going to be gone. And then fast forward 30 years after that, there was more bank tellers than there were before. And what happened was the ATMs changed the economies of scale of how you did banking. And so there was fewer large banks, but lots of small banks. So each small bank had, just a couple tellers, but you added that up and there was more bank tellers than there were before. So I think it's an interesting caution. Like, if you're worried that all jobs are going to go away, like, think about the ATM and what economies of scale are going to change, and maybe things will change and be different, but it might not play out the way you think. So I'll skip this, and then I'll come to the end. So thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mike, for kind of getting us started, and we're looking forward to spending the next hour talking about how this is being used at a couple of industry leaders. So let me first introduce our other two panelists. I do want to also offer, so if you have questions, we will leave time for some questions from the audience. So be thinking of when I ask for questions, be thinking of what you might want to ask. Carissa will have the microphone to make sure that everybody can hear. If you have specific questions for Mike on his presentation, certainly happy to take those during the discussion as well. So our two panelists that are joining Mike and I. First, Asim Ganchi serves as the Assistant Vice President of Technology Services at BNSF Railway. In this capacity, he leads teams that support a wide range of critical systems, including BNSF's customer-facing platforms, customer relation management system, pricing system, and terminal operating systems for BNSF's 27 intermodal hubs. Asim is also responsible for the asset management system that oversees BNSF's 32,000 miles of track, as well as its fleet of rail cars and locomotives. Additionally, he oversees BNSF's unmanned aerial system program, machine vision technologies, and automation and autonomous technologies. So that's a big portfolio. A busy person. Next, we have Cody Griggs, and she is the Vice President of Digital Brokerage at C.H. Robinson, North America's largest freight brokerage firm, and as we all know, based here in the Twin Cities. Her deep expertise in the organization and the supply chain industry comes from a range of roles across North America, including operations, sales, and strategies. And Cody is also dedicated to mentoring women leaders as the executive sponsor in the Women's Leadership Networking Circle, and she serves on the boards of the St. Christopher's Truckers Relief Fund and the TIA Technology Committee. She holds a degree in business marketing and management from Appalachian State University. So welcome to both of you. And I've asked both Asim and Cody to start out just offering some initial examples of how their businesses are using AI applications. So Asim, if you want to start us off, that'd be great.
Absolutely. Thank you for the invitation for us to kind of share some of the things we're doing in AI, and thank you for coming here today. A few things. I'm gonna refer back to some of the definitions that you shared with us for artificial intelligence, right? So AGI, which is general intelligence, we're not doing anything in that field at this point in time. And I don't think we're anywhere close to doing anything related to artificial general intelligence. But when we talk about deep learning and we talk about that fourth category, a lot of our stuff falls in that, and then also some of the LLMs, which are becoming very popular, especially in the customer service area. So let me start with the deep learning area, specifically in machine vision. So that's an area we have been dabbling in since 2018. Before we had tools that would allow you to just upload a few pictures and say, hey, learn how to spot a cat or a dog. But if you gave the machine a tree and there's a cat in the tree, it would have a tough time finding those things. So that's when we started using machine vision, and at this point in time, we are analyzing about 3.5 million images a day. And we have 45 plus models that look for almost 30 plus defects as trains are rolling across our network. So we have machine vision systems, what we call them, where they are taking pictures of these trains as they are moving at track speed. And then in real time, we are analyzing the data to provide the subset of pictures that potentially have issues. And then there's always a human in the loop making sure that that's the case before we take the necessary action. So that's an area where we are definitely using AI, deep learning, machine vision. So, and related to that, we are also now flying drones at a couple of our facilities. So think about our facilities, they're very large. So Alliance, Texas, for example, is 500 acres. It has 8,500 parking spots where we can place a container that needs to be loaded on a rail car and then moved over to somewhere. So you have all these containers, truckers are bringing in the containers, pulling containers out, and you need to know exactly where the containers are on our location to optimize how we load the trains. So to do that, we are flying drones that are taking pictures and videos of the parking lots, and we're analyzing that data and then using GPS, GIS to match that container specifically in that specific location so that we know exactly where everything is. What does that do? So on top of that, then we have another AI that allows us to optimally load the train, meaning if there's a container here, right in front of me, and here's the rail car that needs to be loaded, let's minimize the distance of that container to the rail car. Before, what was happening is when you're driving around these facilities, you don't have a view where you can easily do that, or the person who's planning to load the train can easily do that. So then we use these algorithms which are allowing us to figure out the whole plan. I'll give it to the person who is planning the train, and then the person who is driving the hostler, which is the yard truck to move the containers, all they're doing is executing. So the point is that, make it easy. We talked about change management. That's a big thing, is like, how do we introduce AI in their day-to-day operations where they are not doing anything different, but behind the scenes, the algorithm is giving them a plan, which is the optimal plan to load the train. So that's another example. Now, to do that, we need to know exactly where the containers are. So flying the drones and making sure that we have an efficient way of knowing where everything is helps us do that. So that's another example. Going to the third example, we have people who are serving our customers, our customer service desk that takes calls from our customers, anything going on with the shipments, so on and so forth. A lot of time, they spend a lot of time trying to find information from multiple systems. So they're going in our mainframe systems, they are looking up information in system B, C, D. So sometimes it takes 5, 10, 15 minutes, maybe 30 minutes to get back to the customers with what their question specifically is. And in this is the latest area where we are trying the AI, where about 60 of our customer service agents are now using something like a ChatGPT, where the AI, which is the ChatGPT like AI, is gathering all that information and summarizing it for them as soon as the customer calls on the situation. So this makes it much optimal to give them the answer quicker, and then allows our customer service agent to provide better customer service so that we can quickly get back to our customers. So this is the latest area. where we are leveraging AI. And again, it is at the heels of a lot of data, right? We had to have cases documented on, hey, in this particular case, this is the situation, and here's where you get the answers, and train the AI over time to be able to do that summarization more accurately and not hallucinate, as you were talking about, because it could easily drift and start giving answers unless you lock the AI kind of and say, you will only answer based on this data set, rather than going out everything on the internet and using that to answer a customer's question. And some of those answers I'm not going to share with you. So we had to do some work there. So those are some examples where how we are leveraging AI in day to day, and as we go through it, I'll share more examples with you.
Go ahead, Cody.
Yeah, absolutely. So, similar to the way that Michael kind of laid it out, we think of the use of AI in three main buckets at C.H. Robinson. So we have machine learning algorithms that we've been using for quite a while now, specifically in the pricing and costing space. They power a lot of our pricing and costing. They power our freight matching algorithms, so how we determine which carriers would match with which shipments. And that's been in play for a really long time. And where we're starting to expand, and so we have a heavy machine learning practice, and then the optimization of those choices, as well as optimization of shipment routings and mode optimization. We use a lot of machine learning in that space too, but where we're really starting to advance is more in the LLM use case, so in the generative AI space. And similar to what Asim was explaining around the customer service piece, the first place that we started really was in quote delivery. So we have the pricing algorithms, we have the costing algorithms to determine what price a given shipment should be priced at. But the way that we were delivering that was a customer would email or call their account rep. They would ask for, or they would use the website, but if they weren't using the website to self-service their own pricing, they were reaching out to an account manager and saying, I have this shipment, what's the price for it? That account manager would then go into our system, enter in all of the quote details, get a price the shipment. And so it was not just human in the loop, it was completely human dependent. And so what we've done is we've added what we call our email classifier over the top of our entire Outlook system. So all inbound emails go through an email classifier. And if it turns out that request is a pricing request, the account manager has the ability, with a human in the loop, to kind of set what the pricing strategy is for a given client. And then the email classifier goes and sends that quote request out, hits our pricing algorithms that we've been developed for years, generates a quote request and responds to the customer within 60 seconds. So what that's enabled is allowed us to kind of take that, what we had from an API quoting standpoint and a web service quoting standpoint, into email. And it's unlocked a huge amount of productivity for us by just generating quote requests back out to our customers. And so that was kind of the first step that we took. And then what would happen was that customer would then reply and say, yes, that quote looks great, I would love to ship that load. And then we would go, oh, okay, well, I guess we got to throw a body at that. So then our next step was to automate our order create process. So customer passes back and says, oh, yeah, that quote looks good. Can you ship that for me? Here's some more information about where that load picks up and delivers and what it is. And so the email classifier now goes and then maps that into Navisphere, creates that shipment, and then we can automate that order creation lifecycle. And then we've just kind of gone down the order life cycle and looked at every single activity that we were deploying people against that wasn't really a value additive activity, and saying, okay, how can we automate appointments using this? How can we automate load matching? And so what we did kind of as we looked through that shipment life cycle, and I keep doing this because our shipments move from left to right on our in our workflow, so it's just always going left to right, was to take our carrier load recommendations. So we have a matching algorithm that takes into account available supply, what trucking companies have available equipment that they've either explicitly told us or that we are aware of based on their hauling of freight for us, and we know that they're finishing out a load. We use machine learning to generate those carrier matches, and then we've started texting carriers about available shipments in their area. So letting them know that we've got loads available for them, we have something that we think would be a good match for them, here's what the price is for you, and then trying to automate that process of them finding a load. what we've found is that dispatchers typically sit in an office and they're hitting refresh on multiple brokers' websites looking for freight. It's very much a hunting type of activity, and so when we can bring that to them, we're helping them find freight about 4 times faster than what they would be doing on their own. Those are kind of our main kind of recent plays into and how we use generative AI.
Great, thanks. Mike, any examples or anything you want to share before we jump into the questions?
jump in.
No? Okay, all right. So you've shared some examples of AI in practice. Have you been able to see return on investment? And if so, what does that look like? How are you measuring impact for your organizations in the use of these applications?
Sure. So I gave quite a few examples in machine vision, and so what is the purpose? So at BNSF we move freight. So we're not in the technology business, although I'm in the technology business, but my business partners don't realize that. I would love to do technology for the sake of technology because it's cool, but that's not how it works. It has to have a purpose. So the lens we put around implementing technology, leveraging technology is always number one, safety, and then productivity and efficiency. So those are the 3 lenses that we use to say, hey, is there something out there that helps us improve safety, productivity, efficiency, provide better customer service, essentially. And that's how we really gravitated towards machine vision, for example, as something that could improve our safety overlay in terms of how we move shipments across our network, which is where we are seeing true benefits of our incidents for the railroad go down over time as we are implementing more and more technology like machine vision. So that's a benefit we directly see. I talked about the drones flying over our yard, these large, massive yards. We have seen 20% improvement in terms of accuracy of our inventory, and it's getting better and better. One of the things I didn't talk about is, in addition to drones, the tractors that are moving the stuff in the yards from point A to point B, we are now installing our own camera system on them. So as they are doing their work, we're constantly doing the inventory management. So that's another example of AI, and that's seeing real benefits. I talked about the way we are loading the trains by minimizing the distance from the containers to where we need to load that container on the rail car. So on that one, we are seeing very significant benefits. If we analyze those benefits, we're seeing almost 400,000 miles in savings from that Hostler tractor driving. Because think about how many facilities we have, right? And how many tractors we have. Now, what does that do? That less fuel, less emissions, all those things come in hand in hand. 300,000 gallons of fuel. We are creating additional capacity. So think of our facilities in Chicago and Los Angeles. Here, some of them are really landlocked. We can't just go buy more land and then permit it and add more equipment to grow our capacity. So we're seeing additional 400,000 lifts across our networks, additional capacity. And a lift is taking a container, moving it on a train, or taking it from a train and putting it back on, right? And to do that, you need space. You need areas to load it, unload it. And if the container is just sitting there, taking up time, then we can't bring in that next train and unload it or load it because there's already spaces being occupied. So we're seeing those kind of real benefits as we are deploying these AI solutions.
Yeah. Cody?
I'd say for us, it started out as productivity. It started out as, how do we continue to automate our business? How do we continue to drive low value touches out of our network? And we've seen a ton of uplift there. So from a productivity gain standpoint, we measure that in a few different ways, but overall it's been about a 15% improvement this year in our employee productivity. And then I think, the 2 other spaces that I would say, we started with productivity, but where you start to really lean into it is when I was talking about the quote piece, it's growth. It's getting back to a customer and being able to respond quicker to that customer and get your price in front of that shipper faster, you're much more likely to actually convert that into a buy. And so we've seen growth opportunities come from our ability to respond quicker to those customers. And then, something that's even more difficult to manage from an ROI standpoint is accuracy. So when we take a look at order entry errors that we were seeing that could potentially cause issues downstream, when we are automating that order entry process and you're not copy pasting something, you're not transposing something from an email into, doing manual data entry, again, it's really, really difficult for us to quantify, but the accuracy improvements that we're seeing there, it improves the customer's experience, it improves service delivery, and limits our ability to have mistakes further downstream in the transportation process.
Great.
I'll add something kind of generically on top of this. I think it complements what they're saying, is that one of the reasons I like to think about the different frameworks for AI and talk about specifically optimization is that early on I saw a lot of companies that would make predictions but then couldn't get the ROI because they didn't take the next step of actually making a decision. And optimization and other kinds of technology can help you take that additional step. So I think you talked about it like, you can have the vision of sort of where all the containers are, but you need the next step is the optimization to minimize that 400,000 miles. And the two go together hand in hand. And that's why you need people on your team who can think about these things, is how do I take it from predicting, understanding, to all the way to like make a decision.
Great. So staying sort of in the ROI realm, what is your view on companies that are taking a portfolio approach to AI projects? So since a lot of AI is new or risky, both upside and downside risky, do you kick off several projects knowing that some of them will fail or might not be as successful as you want, and some will be successful beyond what you think?
I think I had this written down as yes. So, the way that we think about the use of this at Robinson, and I think this became, I want to say it was like last spring, there was just like, it was all anybody talked about, right? It was, what are we doing with Gen AI? What's our approach on ChatGPT? What are we going to do here? And so very rapidly we said, like, we need to centralize the use of this. Like, we need to really rein this in, because otherwise it's just going to be all over the place and who knows what's going to happen. And we don't want to limit it, but we just want to be really intentional about what we're doing here. And so we do have a team that's responsible just for our partnerships with Microsoft and how we think about the use of Copilot and our instance of LLMs in our own walls. And then that team is also responsible for just overall partnerships with how we think about who's doing what in this space. So from a freight tech standpoint, it is just nuts. Like, new companies are pumping up left and right. And if we didn't centralize what those partnerships look like, we would just be in a lot of trouble. So yes, there is a team that's responsible for identifying new opportunities. And then, what Michael was saying about translator, that is so, so important for us. So my team is a team of product managers who run the spectrum from highly technical product managers, former developers, all the way up through former business leaders like myself. And so having that translator in the space where, like, we've partnered a technologist, so our vice president of artificial intelligence, with our senior director of customer connectivity, and she speaks business and he speaks whatever technology people speak, and partner together, they come up with, like, he's bringing forward all of these, he attended Microsoft Ignite and was talking about all of these agentic workflows that we could use, and she's sitting there looking at the business workflows and going, oh, okay, so if we build this data layer of all of our knowledge, we could build this technology workflow over top of it, and I know exactly who to talk to in the business to get that done. And so that partnership has been really, really powerful for us and allowed us to have this full portfolio of projects going all over the place, knowing that, yes, some of them will bomb very rapidly and we will move on. And some of them are like, okay, well, this initial use case is not at all what's going to work, but we could use it over here. And so centralizing that has been really, really important for us.
Thank you. Similarly, and I want to go back to something you said, right? We've been doing predictive maintenance, optimization, all these machine learning models for decades almost. Yeah. And you had mentioned that the nomenclature suddenly changed when Gen AI popped up and ChatGPT popped up, and it also heightened the awareness that the pitfalls of leveraging AI as the term AI became very common. For example, asking a question or somebody said fit their own proprietary information into these models. Well, the model is learning all the time, and then if somebody else asks that question, it's exposed to the world. So that caught a lot of attention at our organization. So a few things we have done is we know that people want to use AI because it helps each one of us become more productive. I think Apple just released a few days ago their 18.2 version, and now it's summarizing my emails. I pulled up my email, and suddenly all my important emails are summarized on the top. There's a summary. Great, that helps me.
So you didn't get my email?
Let me ask
Damn it,
AI.
Apple.
Hey, I'm not going to say, hey, Siri, because each one of you are so that caught our attention. The very first thing we did is say, how can we make AI available to everybody in the company so they can experiment with it, learn it, but in a safe way. And similar to what you were talking about, we had our engineers very quickly come up in a secure way to bring ChatGPT within our environment, secured environment, so that the rest of the world doesn't have access to it. So as our folks start to play with AI, let's do the very first step and not expose our data to the rest of the world, because it is proprietary. It is BNSF's knowledge, and how do we avoid those kind of mistakes? So that was number one. Very quickly we did that and said, hey, if you want to play with it, feel free to do so, but use our own instance. And when I say instance, it is behind our firewall, behind our security, so on and so forth. So that was number one. Number two, what we did is there's huge interest at our executive level, so we formed an AI ethics committee very quickly, which is our top leadership. We have folks from our law department, our HR department, our business side, who are part of that committee that are looking at those large use case, high value use cases to make sure that we are doing it in an ethical manner, and we are focused on the right things. So we did that, and we did take a portfolio approach. So even though a lot of our development is, it's all in technology services, so it is centralized, but within technology services, you have multiple teams who are working on different projects and problems based on who the business partner is. So we did take a portfolio approach where we have a set of our top AI initiative list that gets reviewed every month with our executives, including our CEO, to make sure that we're making progress and making sure that we're working on the right problems for BNSF. So that's been our approach for that.
Great.
Can I add something?
Yes.
Please. So I think a point you both made was pretty interesting. Is that at some point our students can use this ChatGPT all they want, and I was asking my students sometime in the spring. I said, "What if you go work for a company where they don't allow ChatGPT? And what would you do?" And their basic answer was, "We would just use it at home." And so,
oh God.
And so, like, I think both of the panelists here talked about the fact, like, you wanted to sort of bring that in. Mm-hmm. Ethan Malik, the guy I talked about, calls that secret cyborgs. Is that you have these people who they're going to use this no matter what, yes. And you have to think about as an organization, like, how do you give people these tools so they can use them, because they are going to use them.
Yeah, I mean, our chief strategy and innovation officer in the spring was like, this is like when the internet started, and companies were like, no web browsers. Like, no, you can't use the internet, or I'm going to limit your amount of usage on the internet. And we laugh at that now. We're like, how would you even do your job? But he looked at it the exact same way. He's like, don't shut it down, just control it.
Right.
So we started to talk a little bit about ethics, and I'm going to jump to that question here. So as companies are integrating AI into their operations, you know, what are those ethical considerations or risks that they should be aware of?
So I'll kick it off. You know, we've talked about hallucination, biases, and where does that stem from? That stems from data. And so having a really good view of what data are you feeding your AI to learn. And that's very important for us. And how do you box it to say, because, you know, in our case, when it comes to safety, we're not going to let ChatGPT answer those safety questions, because people could lose their lives. So so that's an area we're saying, hey, that's not ready for something like AI, which can hallucinate and give a wrong answer. Absolutely not, right? But there are other areas like customer service where we have a human in the loop, we have a person reviewing the data coming out of it, and we are boxing the AI to use a specific set of data. And that's where we are seeing good high accuracy, so on and so forth, and not letting it just loose on everything in the company and go look at every single database and come up with an answer. So that's very important, is the biases in the data, how clean is the data, and what kind of data are you feeding the AI. That's extremely important for us to make sure that we're doing it in the optimal manner.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, and it's a tough question that I think we're really tackling on a case-by-case basis. I think, like this example of, there are absolutely decisions where we would say, nope, this needs to be more informed, or the risk is too high to entrust this decision-making process to a machine that we are in the middle of testing out. But I would say that, back to the earlier question about portfolio approach, that actually allows us, that type of approach to these projects allows us to be a lot more controlled about where we're using them, where we're not. We're working with a partner right now that we're talking with that I would say, like, as a business person, I'm like, this is amazing. And then as a human, I'm like, this is really freaky. So like, as we're having that kind of like, it's just this existential crisis for every one of these type of things that you look at, that you go, okay, well, how do I feel about this? And how does that influence how I think about this in our business? So it's a very regular conversation that we're having about how do we use this, but allowing us to, having it in that portfolio approach allows us to have a little bit more control over it, is kind of how we're thinking about it.
Mike? So I've got plenty of questions to continue. Any initial questions from the audience that you'd like to ask? Oh, one over here.
Thanks. My name is Mark Brown. I'm from Quetico, and been coming to this forum for many years. And so one of the purposes is to look at how the intersection of public and private sectors work together. So a couple years ago, we had Andrew Peterson here from USDOT that talked about kicking off the flow, the freight logistics optimization works. I know C.H. Robinson participates. I believe BNSF does. I've also had the chance to talk to retired General Stephen Lyons, who is the White House supply chain disruption czar. And he really had this vision of, in the future, having digital twins that could help sort of figure out, right now we've got private systems like BNSF and trucking companies, and then we've got the public networks and the highway system, and there are all those separate data streams. But do you ever see, or can you see a path forward of where there may be an intersection for the public and private sectors to begin sharing those data layers? You talked about the three big pieces, the data and then the algorithms. Do you ever see a path forward where the public and private sectors could begin to manage those data layers together to create better managed systems or networks?
Yeah, I think one of the examples that comes to mind, and I'm sure Asim has others, but one of the partnerships that we're forming is with a private sector company who is working with local state governments on the access to their highway cameras and the use of optical recognition to understand equipment information that's going on the roadways, and using that more for like a shipment visibility. There's a huge fraud problem in the trucking industry right now, and so their initial use cases are on fraud protection and equipment location information. But I think there's a much broader use case for that data around infrastructure usage and how, the use of both their private cameras that they're placing facing public roadways, in addition to the partnerships that they're forming with state and local governments to access that information. I think as far as like the data itself and the management of it, in this use case, it's much more private sector owned, and they're partnering and sharing that out. I don't know about the co-management of that. It gets a little bit squirrely. But that's kind of the use case that comes to mind when I think about where I've seen that work. But as far as Robinson goes, like you mentioned, we're active in working with both federal and state governments around sharing information around like what we see from supply chain. and what we see as opportunities in safety and carrier regulations and opportunities around that space. So that's the perspective I have on it.
Yeah, just a couple of points is, one is I'm going to drift slightly to warmer climate here for a second, just in my head. So I was on another panel, and we talked about this in California because we were talking to the ports, a lot of folks from the ports. So when you think about supply chain, a lot of handoffs. Obviously, you have shipments coming in, imports coming in, you have the ports involved, you have the shipping lines involved, and you get on the rail, on dock, then moves inland, so on and so forth. You have transloading operations where you're breaking things from the international container into 53-foot domestic boxes, and then it moves inland, so on and so forth. So definitely there is a lot of interest in how do we optimize the overall supply chain. And the way you optimize it is, at least for us, we're already talking to the ports and other carriers to say, hey, if you give us the information and we know when the shipment is going to come to us, we can better plan equipment. We can make sure that the trains are ready to go when you offload containers from a ship, so on and so forth. And so the whole supply chain starts becoming more and more efficient, and then you can apply more algorithm and optimizations as you move forward. So within our own space, we have already started those discussions with the ports and other entities on how much further advanced information can we get from you guys, because if we get it at the last minute, it's not easy to turn the switch on and say, I'm going to provide you 50 rail cars. It takes time to move that equipment. It takes time to position the crews and the locomotives to bring that equipment. And the more information we have, the better we can make those handoffs, which overall improves the overall supply chain. So I hope I answered your question, but we're already thinking about that.
Mike, any comments? Okay. Any other initial questions? Yes. Hold on, the microphone's on its way.
We're going to make Carissa run.
I know, she is.
Hi, my name is Adrian from Factory Model Part. I have a question about the AI implementation that you have. It usually start from a POC. And what's the most challenging things that you encounter when you implement it and put it into production and scale? Also, how do you, what's the experience or lessons that you want to share in this process?
Yeah, people. So I would say adoption is our number one challenge. So I think that there is a significant amount of fear in job replacement and in this is going to take over, kind of the ATM example. And so there's a spectrum of folks in our operations teams who are very willing to try new things and see the opportunities and see the ability for this to remove tasks that they don't like doing. And then there's a large spectrum of people who don't want to engage with it because they're fearful that this will mean that their job is being eliminated. And so we've done a ton of strategic messaging and a lot of leadership and a lot of conversations in change management specifically to help people understand how the certain process that we're replacing or the certain workflow that we're going to be changing is not in the name of eliminating their role. It's in the name of increasing efficiency and helping them to do what they prefer to, the work that they prefer to do. But I would say that's been our largest challenge, and it takes the most amount of time, but it's time well spent, because once you can get those folks engaging with the models, engaging with the change in the process, and being active in the feedback loop, it only improves the final product. So that's where we spend a significant amount of time, because our goal is not to just replace people with computers. We need those people's intellect and expertise and identifying hallucinations and identifying factual parts where it's gone wrong and improving on that. So I'd say that's what our experience has been.
It's similar, and depends on the use case. But I always tell my business folks they come up with really good ideas all the time, and The one thing that I always ask them is like, hey, how do we scale this? How do we make sure that, yes, it works in a lab, it works on this computer, but when we talk about our workforce that is operating in an environment outside like this, working out in the field, now how do we scale it in a way that it gets used, and then is it scalable? So that's a constant discussion that we have to keep in mind. And I think you alluded to this point. You had the three things where data layer, you had the algorithms, and you had the software. So think about a planner, for example. The way that person is planning at a facility, if you disrupt that, that's a huge change management effort across our entire network with hundreds and thousands of planners that have different views. So one of the things we start discussing from the very early on, where I'm going with this, is how do we embed AI in a way that it doesn't disrupt the way they work day to day. So if they have a screen where they have a list of things that they have to plan on a train, behind the scenes we're running algorithm to produce that list in an optimal manner where their work environment, their work process is not changing, but we are doing a lot of this AI stuff behind the scenes and then pushing it into our operational system. Now, that's not straightforward because we have systems from decades old that may or may not easily have the ability to push information in such a way that it doesn't change them. But the last thing we want is to give them another screen and say, now you go look here and see what the AI is producing, and then you use that to bring it here. And that's what we try to avoid. So change management is a huge piece of how adoption will happen. And then ideally, we don't even want them to know that something changed. We just did it in the background and provided them an optimal solution. So that's how we are thinking about it.
Go ahead.
And so one of the quick thing to add is that I think when you build these systems, the other thing you want to plan for is plan for the maintenance of these systems. So sometimes that gets forgotten, and you need to educate the business that once we build it, we have to maintain this. We want to watch for drift, and things will change with the input data. And so keep that in mind as you're thinking about rolling these systems out.
So following up a little bit on that, as it relates to your workforce, so how, what are you thinking about in terms of like the skills and training that maybe is needed for your existing staff, and how are you thinking about recruitment and retention as it relates to more utilization of these different applications?
Yeah, I think prompt engineering is something that we wouldn't have ever even thought about last year, even around how do we identify talent at the desk level who is helping us also write prompts and improve a large language model is something that we wouldn't have ever considered. And so we're starting to think more about, as we remove some of and automate some of the more rote tasks in our workflows, what does that mean for an account manager from a skill set standpoint? What does that mean for an operations coordinator from a skill set standpoint? And workforce planning for size of workforce. How many of those do we need in the future is an ongoing conversation. And also when we think about the talent from a shared services or a technology team level, what does a data science team look like in the future? What does an analytics team look like? What type of skill sets are we looking for from software engineering? It has shifted a lot of our thinking on job descriptions and qualifications. Just as we think about an openness and a willingness to explore new technologies is something that we're really looking to invest in.
So I talked about change management. There is constant education training within our technology services where we have online courses available, so on and so forth, for people to take. We have business folks taking those courses also. Our goal is, right now to make our people more productive, because these tools are very good at summarizing, coding, things like that you talked about. And so how do we ensure that, they are leveraging the ChatGPTs and AI for the right things? Now, the hope is that we will educate them enough that they understand that you can use them to take your ideas and summarize it better or write something more efficiently, so on and so forth. And that's the hope. But getting to the first step of getting them to use the tool is critical, because For us, the workforce is, we have folks who have just started and are in the company for 5 years. We have folks who've been there, like me, dinosaurs, 30 years plus. So how do we get people to say who's going to use it? How are they going to use it? How do we get them to see the benefits of it? So that's our goal, and people have different levels, different ways of learning. So we all know that. So we provide online training, we do one-on-ones with our leaderships, we present in town halls where we have a group of people to give them specific use cases on how they can use AI. And then we have groups of people who are excelling at leveraging AI to teach others across the company that here are some of the things we have done day to day, build PowerPoints or automate the workflow for X, Y, and Z. And how can you get out of the grunt work, the day-to-day mundane tasks, and focus more on the value-added tasks? And that's kind of how we are focusing on AI.
So
Yeah, go ahead.
just two fun little stories on sort of how skills are changing. So I was talking to two different software executives recently, and one of them was saying that they had one coder. It wasn't their whole code team, but one coder who was just talking to the machine and saying, I want the code to do this. Oh, no, don't do it that way. Do it another way. And I thought, well, that's interesting evolution. It's like now we have a coder who just speaks. And the code gets written. And then the other executive had I think, an interesting thing to say. He said that in 5 years, we'll look at if coders aren't using tools like ChatGPT, we'll think that's unethical because you might be introducing bugs, security flaws that are already been solved. And if you're not using this technology that's available to you, you're now the problem. So it's going to be an interesting shift.
So Mike, on the academic side, what should universities be thinking about in this space, like business schools, the engineering schools, planning and policy schools? What should we be thinking about, or how should we be preparing the students that attend our institutions to be ready to move into a workplace that is utilizing these applications?
Yeah, unfortunately, what I've seen is that the sort of chatter is that the universities are sort of the slowest to adopt this stuff because it's really messed up our ability to do tests and give people essays and that kind of stuff. And so the universities are sort of fighting it the hardest. I think a couple of our programs at Northwestern, so it's kind of decentralized, but a couple of programs I think are doing it right, are just all in on ChatGPT and tools like this. We're telling our students, like, you should use this. The assumption should be that by default you should use it unless you're told not to. I see some other groups of students who are sort of hesitant, thinking it's a little bit of cheating, and I'm kind of pushing them in the other direction to say, like, you should be leveraging these tools. If your professors aren't asking the right questions or doing something in a weird way, it's like, that's on us, not on you guys. Like, industry wants you to be able to use this kind of capability. So I think universities have to be all in. We have to figure out tests and essays and all that, but that's on us, not how do we train the next generation of students.
Yeah.
That's my take.
And this is more of a personal experience type of thing, but I'm married to a 9th grade teacher at a high school locally here, and it's very similar. Like, the kids aren't the problem. Like, they've figured it out, and it's his ability to keep up and be open-minded to, okay, how do I put guardrails around this? I mean, it's similar to the internet, right? Like, how do I put guardrails around the usage of this? How do I learn how to use it for my skill sets? And how do I learn to use it in grading, identifying opportunities where it's missed the mark? That's exactly, he's in the same boat.
Great. Yes?
Hi, Craig Bevan with HNTV.
Oh, there's
It's right there. I need eyes in the back of my head. I'll work on that. So I'm sure you both are probably pitched all the time from AI companies and startups and even your current vendors and partners. How do you balance, or how do you evaluate all of the latest tech and service and offerings and make that decision of, should we have our own people train up and do this, or should I pay a consultant or license software?
Yeah, that's fun. It's a lot of pitches from companies that are like, we can do all of the things now. And so part of that is just using business sense and knowing what I know about our company and our capabilities and wading through kind of like, we do a lot of talking about, give me a specific use case for my business that you think you can solve. What is a specific problem? And if that answer isn't like really clean and obvious, we're gonna move on pretty quickly. I would say for Robinson specifically, I do a lot of vendor evaluation and selection, and a lot of my criteria has to do with, are you focused in a very specific niche that we have identified as not a core competency of ours, and that is your entire focus. So take, for example, We recently changed our partner who does all of our carrier onboarding. So they do all of the evaluation of a carrier's safety regulations, what their current insurance is, are they a carrier in good standing with the federal government? That is something that we toyed with for a very long time. Like, should we just build this ourselves? Should we build all these connections? Should we do the IRS filing reviews, all of that fun stuff? And ultimately, we found a partner who was really focused on what we needed and manipulating and understanding our systems, not manipulating, understanding our systems, connecting with us the way that we needed to. And this is the only thing they do. All they do is carrier identity and carrier onboarding and monitoring. And so that was the right partner for us. But for us, it really does have to do with, like, to your point about, like, is this something we could build? I would say you asked Robinson 10 years ago, we're building everything. We're buying nothing. And we've really shifted our focus as we've recognized that, I think Michael's point's really valid. Like, you can build it, but who's going to run it? Who's going to maintain this thing? We have a lot of orphan technology that's just like chilling. Like, nobody's doing much with it. It's fine. But that's the position that you end up in when you build a lot of these things. And so we're doing that ROI very regularly, and a lot of it has to do with just like, what are our core competencies?
Yeah, that's, I don't know if I have a great answer. I'm still building a AI that will unblock any caller that is not in my contact list. I get about 24 calls a day, yes, on everything that people can do with AI, but it's tough. It's a lot of people are coming up with a lot of solution on one hand. Maybe you'll miss something that could be truly beneficial for what we are trying to do as a company that somebody's already solved. On the other hand, everybody has some sort of AI solution suddenly that could benefit and do wonders. So it's a balancing act for us. So we have partners that already we work with, very large partners in technology space we've been working with decades. So typically our strategy is hey, if something new comes up, then we are getting it through our existing partners and helping us how they can help us solve that. The other thing is where they are in the maturity model. That's very important for us. For example, machine vision, I get so many calls, they talk to us. We've been doing it since 2018. So, we can ask a lot of questions to really understand where their maturity is, and could they then take us to that next step level that we are looking for in terms of accuracy, reducing false positives, so on and so forth. And then the third thing is again, we know our systems really well, and it's what I was talking about earlier is integrating it and change management and bringing AI in a way that our people will use it, adopt it, is very critical. So yes, you can build a solution here, but then how does it work in truly bringing it in front of the user and then scaling it across our network depending on the use case. So that's kind of how we evaluate partners. We're constantly working with outside entities who are bringing in new solutions, but we also have a lot of smart folks who have been doing this for years and years that we can ask the right questions to say, hey, does it make sense for BNSF, and do you have the maturity to help us take this to the next level?
I think I want to pile onto that because you're absolutely right, and I think that's something that I forget about a lot. So C.H. Robinson and BNSF, like massive companies, right? Huge scale, and a lot of these partners that are approaching us are startups. They've gotten maybe a few small brokers under their belt, and those conversations turn sideways pretty quickly. We've been lucky enough to have a few partners say, like, I can't help you right now. I can't take your scale. I'm sorry I called. I'm going to call you back in a year. And those are the types of relationships that actually end up working out because they recognize, like, I can't tackle this right now, but I need to grow to be able to support that level of scale. And then the second part I would add is that being a member of the freight brokerage community, I do a lot of channel checking with my frenemies. We call other brokers. I say, hey, have you ever heard of this company? Are you using them? Yeah, we took a call. It was all vaporware. Don't waste your time. And so that has turned out, as things pop up so quickly, that's turned out to be a really great avenue for me personally to just like reach out to a friend and be like, hey, have you ever heard of this company? What are they doing? And it's a really quick, like, yes, no.
Great. So I'm going to ask this
Gina,
question.
we have one more.
Okay,
question.
all right, go ahead.
Yeah, hi, John Houselot, Minnesota Trucking Association. So I'm trying to think of AI applied in the marketplace, particularly C.H. Robinson, and small business. I represent trucking companies, a lot of trucking companies. The average trucking company is, 10 or fewer trucks, so they're a small company.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure how to pose the question to the panel, but so for small business, there's an opportunity that AI presents, but there's also this incredible barrier it now creates, where securing business, securing loads, where it used to be relationships and conveying the value, the unique value that you as a particular business offer, now are filtering everything through a digital world that is AI driven, and you're trying as a small business to get a toehold and do your business. So I guess the question is, any advice to small business, and whether, I'm not sure how you define that anymore, but trucking is an example, but there could be smaller transportation lines, smaller airlines, whatever. And then secondly, for the university, in its mission, its land-grant mission, this is all really important stuff we're talking today, but it's at such a level that getting back to how do we help, again, the citizens of Minnesota, and particularly small businesses, figure out how to operate and succeed in this world. So, kind of a small question.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that, from a C.H. Robinson perspective, yes, a huge amount of our capacity base is small owner-operators and trucking companies. And, what we try to do is use our machine learning and AI to help improve their businesses. And so when there's a resistance to engaging with that, I think that's where take for example, there's a company out there right now that is automating check calls to truck drivers to get their location information. So there's been a resistance from the trucking community from the very beginning to share physical asset location information, right? There's a ton of privacy concerns there. They want to make sure that you're not capturing my location information when you don't need it. And so there's this push for automation of location information and track trace information. And there's companies that have said, truckers don't want them they don't want C.H. Robinson calling them at 3 a.m. and waking them up and asking you where you are, right? It's almost a worse invasion of privacy than just pinging your truck location. There are companies that are using voice-generated AI to make those outbound calls, process that information back from the driver, and then not have to call them anymore. And so what we've found is that when we make those outbound calls with a bot, the truckers or some of the drivers just won't engage with it. Nope, it's the bot, I'm not interested. And there's, just how we think about how can C.H. Robinson help to try to make that easier? How do companies and small businesses are more open and understanding to how we're trying to work with them and how we can co-improve this entire workflow? As far as so that's kind of, it's an answer that's more based on how Robinson engages with the small business and small trucking companies. But I would also say that the same goes for small size shippers, is that when I talk about email quoting and email order entry, a willingness to help us build a mechanism that makes us easier to do business with and makes them easier to engage with us. Some of that's going to come through AI and a willingness to engage with those types of chatbots or different mechanisms. But, at Robinson, making sure that we're putting humans where humans need to be in those relationship buildings is really the key part of it for us. And so figuring out what that balance is.
Yeah, so as you were talking, and some of the things that come to my mind is this is not too much to do with AI, but I'm going to drift a little bit and hallucinate here and move towards the cloud, right? I think there's a huge opportunity for small businesses to embrace technology and have these pre-built solutions that are available on the cloud for them to use, where they don't have to put in heavy infrastructure, technology, buy expensive software, implement it. That's all ready to go in some cases. So I think embracing technology, it would be a big message from me for the small businesses, is go look out there, and there's probably a solution already for for your non-core activities that you could leverage and pay by the drink, or depending on how many. And you don't have to go build an accounting system and so on and so forth. You could use Workday. You could pay people very easily with these cloud-based solutions, and a lot of these cloud-based solutions are using AI. So that would be my message, is there's something probably already out there in getting the business off the ground and getting the information you need and the back-end IT systems and the software and infrastructure. It's become extremely easy. We work with a lot of truckers who come into our facility, mom and pops, for 1 load, 2 load. Some of them have flip phones, and if they only would have an iPhone and use our app, for example, their experience would be a lot better in terms of the app giving them very specific information, pre-registering, and so their process to come in through our gates is a lot easier. They know exactly where the load is. We can GPS, give them GPS coordinates of where their load is in the facility, so on and so forth. So embracing technology, and then also looking at some of the pre-canned solution for small businesses for their non-core activities. I think there's a huge market of solutions out there for them to get off the ground and then expand their business very easily. That would be my feedback.
Anything?
I think for the more tech stuff, I mean, you kind of threw the university in there too, but some of the ways I like to think about the like ChatGPT is it did lower the barriers for some of this technology, some of the more advanced technology. So, in theory, it could open this up for small businesses who are willing to embrace it, that they could sort of upskill themselves a little bit on the, some of the coding, some simple things like that. And then, back to the universities, I just kind of feel like it's the university's responsibility to sort of teach this kind of technology. And this is a good point about the cloud, like teach all the technology, not just the latest AI stuff, but talk about, what stuff is already pre-built. The whole world of all this open source software, like more and more of this stuff is getting cheaper and more accessible for small businesses.
Yeah, I think that part of perhaps the role that we can also play is that engagement and helping to understand and maybe lower the fear or hesitancy in using it. But it feels, I maybe hearken it a little bit to, as we look at autonomous technologies and things like that, people still have a lot of concerns. So it's going to take ongoing and repeated engagement to build awareness and understanding about what the potential is and what problems that it can help solve. So, I think really having to help make that case that this will help you do, run your business better or do your work more effectively or more safely. But that has to be, I think you have to lead with that, is how is it going to help me solve a problem that I have. So, well, we are at time, and this was a great conversation. I think we hopefully set the next panel discussion up really well. So we're going to take a break, but please join me in thanking our panelists and our speakers.
Well, it's great to be a part of this. I am, again, Kyle Shelton, the Director of the Center for Transportation Studies. Thank you again to all the partners and all of you for attending today. I'm really excited to have Senator Rasmussen and Representative Elkins here to talk some more about the ways that AI and freight and logistics and public policy and decision making all intersect. So thank you both for joining us. And I would love if we could just start by each of you sharing a little bit about your backgrounds, your interest and engagement with AI, both as legislators and as folks moving through the world as we're all learning to navigate about it. And Representative, maybe we can start with you.
Sure. My name's Steve Elkins. I represent the western half of Bloomington in the Minnesota House. I am a transportation economist by education. I spent the first 15 or so years of my career setting airfares for a living. And I'm old enough to have done that across the deregulation of the industry, so I got to see both before and after, and got to be one of the pioneers in the development of the the science of yield management, which is that dark art behind those infamous words, seats are limited, some restrictions apply. So I have been involved in this kind of work for a long time. After I left I came here 40 years ago to lead the pricing department at Republic Airlines, and survived to the merger with Northwest, and finally left the industry in the early 90s. And over a period of a couple of years, reinvented myself as it was then called a business intelligence consultant. We'd done a lot of modeling work during my time at Northwest in particular. And gradually grew into an information architect more generally. Towards the end of my career, I was mostly working as an IT solution architect on very complicated data migration, data integration projects that had really nasty data management challenges. And so as a legislator, when the Amos Briggs, the lobbyist for Microsoft, came around shopping for someone to take the lead on data privacy, everybody was pointing at me and saying, yeah, you take this bill to Elkins, he's the data geek. So for spent 5 years working on a data privacy bill, and passed it this past session. So Minnesota became the 19th state to have a state-level Consumer Data Privacy Act. I'm a member of a steering committee for an interstate, multi-state working group on data privacy, cybersecurity, and artificial intelligence. There are 47 states participating in that, about 15 to 20 very actively on an ongoing basis. And so I could talk at some point about what's happening generally in that space, but I don't want to take up all the time here.
Yeah, I think we'll absolutely get to that data and privacy piece, and it's great to hear about that work. Senator, same question.
Good morning. It's great to be with you today. My name is Jordan Rasmussen. I represent 5 counties in west central Minnesota in the Minnesota Senate. I live in Fergus Falls with my wife. And before I ran for the legislature, my background was in the business world. So I started my career as a management consultant at McKinsey & Company. I did actually a lot of global supply chain projects, everything from being in New Zealand to Thailand, a lot of projects here in the United States. And so supply chain optimization was a big thing that our clients were concerned with, and trying to figure out how they could operate the most efficiently. And then later went on to be a private equity investor at Bain Capital, where I largely did software investing. And so even though I'm not a developer by background, not a technologist, was definitely something I had to learn about and see in the marketplace. And then I think how that translates into my work in the legislature is really, I spent a lot of time thinking about the business regulatory environment. I've served on the Commerce Committee my entire time in the legislature, and I think in many ways the Commerce Committee is, in a lot of ways becoming almost a technology committee as well, because of all these different business issues, whether it's in healthcare, whether it's in logistics, entertainment, media, technology, and how states regulate technology and the business models is something that our constituents have interest in, state regulators and agencies have interest in. And I would say too, just to provide some context on how to think about the legislature, because I know folks in this room might not be interested in politics, but I would say politics is interested in you. And what I mean by that is, I think as you're thinking about AI in particular, data privacy, even if you don't think, okay, I don't need the legislature to really do anything, they just need to leave me alone, I think oftentimes that can be a bad strategy, because we'll hear from constituents, we'll hear from other players that want us to take action, and then you'll maybe not be at the table if you're not engaged in helping educate legislators as to what you do and how AI and other tools help you better serve your customers, make your employees more productive. And so I think this is something that we haven't had a ton of conversations with yet. But I can see that advancing here in the near future, The other way to frame it up too is we're kind of in the conflict adjudication business, right? People come to us when they have problems, when they are opposed to other interests. And so I think that's another, you're not going to see innovation necessarily come from the legislature, but if there's conflict that arises up in the economy, in society, between employers and employees, that's where people come to the legislature and basically say, pick a side or figure out how you're going to adjudicate this conflict that we see. And I think, we've heard from some of the earlier conversations, there are going to be some conflicts that come up, right, as we think about AI and technology. Some of those, might be kind of fear-based and not come to reality, but this is something that has a conversation that's literally been going on in politics for hundreds of years. You go back to 19th century Great Britain, and you had people who were literally destroying looms because they were worried about the impact it was going to have on, the social fabric of society to have, new technology come to bear. So I would say don't be surprised as well. If there's conflicts that come up around AI. And the other piece I'll say is, the Star Tribune is never going to have a headline that said, AI worked great today, no complaints, right? What they're going to do is when AI messes up or there's some mistake, they're going to talk about, something really bad happened because this AI tool didn't function as intended. And then that oftentimes comes to the legislature and we say, oh wow, here's a problem, we have to go fix it. And so I think that's something to be aware of too, is that oftentimes that one instance, that anecdote can really drive a lot of conversation, not just in the state, but even nationally. If something happens in Texas, it could all of a sudden be something that the legislators in Minnesota are worried about. And it could be something that doesn't involve your business or even your industry, but you might be wrapped up in it as well. So just wanted to lay some of that context in terms of why we're here today.
Yeah, thanks, Senator. I think, as you can, go ahead.
I was going to say, I was really happy with the way the preceding panel, teed up and discussed this, because one of the big issues that we're wrestling with as legislators in every state is just defining what AI is. And so we heard a very expansive view of different things that people are characterizing as AI, even though many of them have been around for a half century or more. Yeah. And I think one of the interesting things going to happen related to the stuff that Senator Rasmussen is talking about is that whenever a company is putting out discussing their decision support capabilities in their marketing literature, they're going to call it AI when it's sexy, and they're going to not call it AI when they're getting sued.
Absolutely. Well, thanks both for those opening comments. As you can tell, we have two of the right leaders to talk about this and dig into this a little bit more, and I think you both touched on multiple of the pieces that we want to talk through today, and we're going to follow the same mold that we did on the last panel, and I'll ask a few questions and then throw it out to the audience, see if you all have some, and we can bounce back and forth there. But I thought maybe we'd start, you both touched on this already. I'm curious how you think of this as policymakers. Where can government and industry work together to really think about the adoption of AI and addressing some of those regulatory challenges and the shifting? And I'm going to append a little bit there and ask specifically, how do you all think about the different sectors who are going to be coming to you? I mean, we talked about those tools being somewhat universal, but there are also the unique incidences and the unique needs for AI. So I'm really curious how you all are thinking about how the legislature and the business sector industry can work together on these topics. Senator Mason.
I think the challenge from a legislative perspective is that AI is this tool that many of you have already been using, that many industries have already been using, but now the capabilities continue to expand and the use cases continue to expand. And when you look across the regulatory environment, you could see AI being used in insurance, AI being used in autonomous vehicles, freight optimization, media, sports betting. Sports betting companies can be using AI. And so I think the legislature is going to struggle to kind of regulate the tool versus regulate how those tools are used in different end markets. And one of the other challenges that we'll have too is that if you just go through the Minnesota statute books, and there's, they fill up a couple shelves in your office if you have them, just how our statutes are written, it's very oftentimes input driven. So a regulated industry has to do A, B, and C. Here's the process. Here's how many people need to be involved. It's very process driven, and it's not always necessarily outcome driven. And so when you have an AI tool that can radically change the process and how you approach it, it might not fit into that regulatory framework. And that's where I think, especially given that the legislative process can be really slow, if you look across your businesses, if you look across your sector and identify use cases for technology, and you say, boy, even though we haven't developed this today, but are going to need to develop it in the future, but it's not going to fit with this regulatory framework that we have here in Minnesota, that's where people need to be talking to legislators early, because it could, like Representative Elkins mentioned, taking 5 years to get a data privacy bill passed. The legislature, we're not quick, right?
No.
And it's a difficult process, and I think that the industries that are going to really maximize the opportunity and avoid unnecessary regulatory burden are going to be the ones that are talking to legislators proactively ahead of time, making sure that the regulatory framework evolves with the business case. And I think in a lot of ways there's real opportunities for win-wins, because if we focus on outcomes, on safety outcomes in particular, and there was some conversation about that in the previous panel, oftentimes I think this technology is going to enhance safety outcomes. And so how can we make sure that we're capturing that opportunity and allowing that activity to take place?
Yeah, so when I took on the data privacy bill as a project in 2019, one of the first stops that I made was with a University of Minnesota law professor named Bill McGivern. He's now the dean of the law school, but at the time he was highly notable for having written the textbook on data privacy and data security law that was being used in 20 law schools around the country. And so from that initial visit, I picked up a couple of very important basic principles about regulating technology. And the key lesson he taught me, and I've kept to this day, and I proselytize it with all my colleagues, is don't try to regulate the technology, regulate the use cases. The technology changes too quickly. And you can never keep up, so focus on the use cases. And the example he used was just classic. So people in this room might know this, but the whole transition from horses to cars took place over about a 10-year period from 1910 to 1920. Most people would not realize that it really mostly happened that quickly. He said over that period, the tort law just couldn't keep up with the change, and so the way the courts adapted was simply to treat cars as if they were horses. And he said, Steve, you have to write your bills so that they're robust enough to be able to withstand a technological change as extreme as horses to cars. And so I've noticed, in this multi-state working group that I'm in, that I've got legislative colleagues in other states that are, for example, trying to regulate the use of artificial intelligence for the purposes of automated decision making. Automated decision making isn't new, so I asked ChatGPT when was the FICO score invented? And it tells me the FICO score was invented in 1989 by the Fair Isaac Corporation. So this is the classic example of automated decision making, or profiling is the term we use in our data privacy laws. I look at my colleague Bob Rodriguez in Colorado, who actually passed a law related to the use of artificial intelligence for automated decision making. And I said, Bob, where did you get the definition for artificial intelligence? And he said, well, we just used the NIST definition. Well, one of my favorite sayings from my IT days is that one of the great things about standards is that there are so many to choose from. And if you don't like the ones that are out there, don't worry, there'll be a new one coming along soon enough that you might like better. And I read the NIST definition of artificial intelligence, and I said, well, I've spent 25 years in IT, and I'm having a hard time reading this. How do you expect a judge and jury to interpret this? So but the approach that I took is I recognized that in the data privacy bill framework that 19 states have used, there's already a general business term, business use case category called profiling. And profiling is just the use of technology to make consequential decisions related to employment or insurance or housing. It's already there in 19 state data privacy laws. So instead of trying to write a whole new law on use of artificial intelligence for decision making, I just put a paragraph in my data privacy bill that says, if your data is used to profile you, to make consequential decisions about these, employment, yada, 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 then you have the same rights that you would have today under the Fair Credit Reporting Act related to your FICO score, to be able to see the data that was used, correct errors, question the results, be told, why you were denied this service, or what could you have done to improve your score the next time around. And I think just by adding one paragraph to my data privacy law, I've done a much better job actually than Bob Rodriguez did in Colorado, because he's going to spend the next 3 years in rulemakings just trying to agree on the definition of artificial intelligence.
Are you going to email him at the end of every one of those committee meetings?
No, I gave him a hard time.
Okay.
We went to a TechNet conference in LA last week, so I was able to give him a hard time in person. Yeah.
Good. I just was asking about how the legislature is working or could work with industry. I'm also curious, you were already talking a little bit, Representative, about how you have worked with other states. One thing I know this group has contended with when it comes to automation is thinking about different automation rules as we cross state lines. I'm curious, as you all think about this great example of 19 other states doing the data privacy piece, you could also imagine lots of different regulatory approaches to AI and freight and logistics and in other uses. How do you all contend with that if North Dakota passes a law that you all don't think makes sense or makes perfect sense and it's not here? What's the process you all undergo to compare that?
So most of these things, I think most of us would agree, are things that Congress should address. But Congress can't punch its way out of a paper bag right now, and so it's left to us at the state level to be the laboratories of democracy. But on things like this, especially transportation, which of its nature is going to cross state lines, this is where through organizations like the National Conference of State Legislators, we're banding together across state lines to try and keep our bills on these kinds of things as aligned as possible. So all 19 states that have passed data privacy laws have used pretty much the same basic set of definitions across all states.
Great, thanks. Senator, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree with Representative Elkins. I mean, this is something that our founding fathers knew was going to become a problem, right? You have these sovereign states that have legislators that can pass laws and regulate items in their own state, but how do you address issues of interstate commerce? And especially when you're looking at transportation and you're looking at technology, I think it's pretty easy to say that, well, that's interstate commerce. But we've been waiting for a federal data privacy framework for a long time. I don't know if it'll ever come. And I think the same thing here. And so what ends up happening is there's this vacuum, and I think state legislatures feel the need to jump in and to make sure that there's some type of framework. And I think as best as people in this room can be working with groups nationally to be developing these frameworks, to be trying to coordinate as best as possible, that's going to help ensure that you don't have radically different rules in different areas. And I think the other piece that, and this can be tough for Minnesota legislators to understand too, I oftentimes will remind my colleagues that Minnesota, while we're a very important state, we're 2% of the US population, right? We're 2% of the US population. And so we have to make sure that whatever we do here in Minnesota isn't going to create major conflicts for businesses, employees, industries that truly are operating at a national and oftentimes global level too. And that's something, especially with AI, with data privacy, the EU is going to have frameworks on this. Other countries are going to have frameworks on this. And so I think it's going to be this ongoing conversation. And I actually think it's okay for Minnesota to be a fast follower in this space. I don't necessarily want us to have the marquee, big first AI framework bill, because we'll probably mess it up. And so we should take a look at what's happening in other policy frameworks and try to see, okay, this is something that makes sense and works, and we can adopt it here in Minnesota. And I think that's how the conversation should continue, especially in the absence of Congress taking a more proactive approach.
And as you both have already said, unfortunately, with legislation, you don't get to do the iterative, no, do that again, and get back to me tomorrow morning. So it's an interesting point.
Robin and I, my seatmate, were talking about this. Minnesota is rarely the first on anything. We might be second or third, or in my case, 19th. But by the time we do it, we've looked at what every other state has done, and we usually write pretty good legislation.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I'm curious if we could go a little bit more onto the data privacy, and you've already laid out a little bit of, or a lot of the groundwork that you've been working on, and you both have touched on this as well. I'm curious, just beyond the act that we have passed, how else are you thinking about that in sort of this iterative nature of these changes? You touched on some of the broadness of the bill that you put to encompass more, but what else are you intending to tackle here?
Having worked, for a large part of my career in transportation, I was, very attuned to locational data privacy in particular. In fact, the one area where I tweaked one of the standard definitions is on the definition of precise geolocation. So in all of these bills, there is a provision that denotes that data with a certain level of accuracy, in most of the bills it's a third of a mile, is considered sensitive data, which cannot be sold without the prior authorization of the consumer. I tweaked a little bit because thinking about how you would represent like a trip in a database, a trip origin, trip destination. What could you enter in the trip origin and trip destination fields that you would know met that third of a mile standard? And I thought how is the data actually collected? It's collected in these days in terms of digital degrees of latitude and longitude. So this device you're holding in your hand, if it's relatively new, tracks your location to 7 digits of a digital latitude and longitude. So the 7 digits of latitude and longitude is a circle about like this, like a bar coaster. Yep. Okay. So in my definition, I said it's anything more than 3 decimal degrees. So at three decimals, you're at basically plus or minus a football field. At 4 degrees, you're at about 10 feet, okay, or 10 meters, which is accurate enough to identify a street address. Sure. And that's what we really want to protect, is making it hard to turn the coordinates in this phone into a street address, because as soon as someone knows that this device is spending the night at 8709 Sandra Road in Bloomington, it opens up a whole wealth of other already public information about people who live at that address. And I think that's what people are really concerned about, is taking the pseudonymous data that this thing has collected and de-identifying it and using it to associate all kinds of other information about you. So, example, I used digital advertising in my campaign for the first time 2 years ago, and I asked the vendor, how are you targeting my ads? And he said, well, I have a partner who has basically taken this data collected from things like your free weather app. So clue, if anything is free, they're saying in the software industry, if you're not paying for the product, you are the product. Okay, so the weather apps exist to collect your location data. And so they sell the location data, and then there are companies that take the location of the device and map it. To find out where's the device spending the night, map it to an address. So my digital ads, I give the vendor a list of the voters I want to reach and their addresses, and they target the ads to all of the devices that spend the night at that address. So it's creepy. Okay, so that's, in terms of locational data that transportation companies, freight companies, logistics companies would be collecting, those are the concerns, is that we want to make sure that whatever data you have that you're protecting, you're not selling it to somebody who's going to use it to target ads, even my ads to you.
Yeah. Senator, how are you thinking about data privacy? I'm also curious how you're talking to constituents about it and these types of, I think everybody is aware that it is an incredibly iterative and changing space, and I'll speak for myself. There are times where I'm like, I don't know who has my data, or why did I suddenly get an advertisement for gloves? Oh, it's the weather app. No, I'm just curious how you're thinking about data privacy and how you're talking about.
Usually at the end of this, I'll get to say, if there's time left over, I'll tell you how to set the settings on your phone to minimize
it's a public
that.
service.
Yes.
We're in this societal and cultural transition around what does privacy mean, and you can really see it and even have different expectations across generations in terms of what their expectation of data privacy is, their knowledge of how their data is used by other third parties. And I think this is going to be one of those areas where it's important for us to talk about and debate the legal standard, and for obviously market players to understand the legal standard. But then I also would encourage folks to think about what I would call the you have to explain what you're doing test. And think about if you had to sit down and do an interview with WCCO for 5 minutes and explain how you use data. Would you feel comfortable doing that? And even if you're maybe doing everything to the standard of the law, would there be anything that you would say as a part of that interview, or if you were deposed on a witness stand, that maybe you just would feel uncomfortable about? And that's your brain telling you that maybe there's something wrong here, right? Maybe we're taking advantage of people in a way that we shouldn't. Maybe we're doing something that isn't ethical. And I think that's a good test for all these organizations to be able to do, where, sure, maybe you had some notification that someone clicked through and they've consented to this. But if you had to go explain, not just to your customers or your employees, but to the general public, how your data privacy, how their data is being used as a part of your business, is that something you'd feel okay doing? And if not, I think that needs to spur internal conversations, because guess what? When those instances come to light, and we have constituent concerns, that's when the law and the legal standard oftentimes changes. And so I think it was really great to hear BNSF talk about their kind of ethics committee, right? It wasn't a legal review committee. It wasn't looking at what can we get away with. It was really saying, well, what are the ethical standards that we want to have as an organization, and how do we make sure that what we're doing complies with that? And I think especially in the world of AI, where there isn't this legal framework, it's going to be really important to have those strong internal standards and to talk about what your values are.
Yeah, I can add to that. Perfect. But it's in all of our data privacy bills, including mine, there is an attestation section where a company has to describe how they're protecting your data, how they're making sure that you're not using the data in a discriminatory manner, all of these things. And I would get, as the bill was being developed, I would get businesses coming to me and saying, look, the only people who are going to see these attestations is like the Attorney General. If there's a lawsuit or something, why are you making us go to the expense of describing these things? And my answer, exactly to what Senator Rasmussen was saying, is that if you can't write a paragraph about your data minimization policies, or your data retention policies, or your safeguards against using this data in a discriminatory manner, it tells me that you're probably not doing it. You ought to at least be able to describe these policies in plain English, so that somebody at the AG's office or you and I would be able to interpret them. And that's why in that particular provision related for profiling, I put in that you got to be able to explain to the consumer why you made the decision, why your model made the decision that it did.
Yeah, absolutely.
Kyle, and stop me if we're going to talk about this, but I think another really important thing that's becoming a bigger and bigger issue every day is on cybersecurity. And there is really this, a lot of people would say, well, we're private companies, we have a lot of incentives not to get hacked. Why would legislators care about it. And I've had in the area that I represent, I had a private local hospital basically get locked out of their EMR, and it affected my constituents, right? It affected health in the community that I represent. We had a local unit of government, a county in one of the counties I represent, get hacked out of their system. And so this is something that you could think about, okay, that's a liability for the software vendor, or it's something that these entities need to work on. But especially when it comes to transportation, the work that you guys are doing is so critically important to the rest of the economy, to public services. I think that's going to be an area that's going to come under more scrutiny as well. And we've seen it, at the federal level with, kind of issues with airlines and around cybersecurity. And so I think that will be a continuing topic. And it's one where government has a problem with it, the private sector has issues, and I think AI, provides some tools to address it, but it also is going to make those hackers and those criminals smarter than they've ever been.
Yeah, and I also think, to John's question about small businesses, right? Small trucking companies, small freight and logistics companies that don't have an IT department necessarily, or across sectors, right? Thinking about some of those bad actors or companies saying, we'll help you do this thing, how you ensuring, that's a second step of data privacy, right? I'm gonna give you a heads up. I'm gonna ask one more question, then I'm gonna throw it to the audience for a few here. One thing that we think a lot about at CTS and with many of the partners in this room are infrastructure broadly, obviously really focused on transportation, but when we think about AI-driven freight and operations, when we think about connected autonomous vehicles, a lot of the places in transportation where infrastructure is increasingly interconnected with more quickly changing and advanced technologies. How are you all thinking about the legislature's role in enabling particular technologies or enabling infrastructure private infrastructure that shares space with public infrastructure? What do you all see the state's role in creating kind of the containers for the changing technology to continue to iterate and change?
Well, one of the bills I passed a few years ago have the Department of Transportation set up a general kind of freight optimization tool. That's the way it was billed. And Eric Rudin from MnDOT, who was back here, assures me that something that will be delivered this summer. But the general idea was to provide a tool that would provide general recommendations for companies about where in the state would be the most efficient logistically to locate a factory or something like that. Mm-hmm. So that's one way that we're trying to assist smaller businesses who might not have this kind of a capability get it. And then of course, the state has been very active, MnDOT and the Center for Transportation Studies, in the realm of connected and automated vehicles. That work is ongoing. I rode my first Waymo in Los Angeles last week, and I had a guided tour the first time, and was so impressed that I took a solo ride, downloaded the app and did a solo ride the next day, and there were presentations from companies like Aurora, the connected and automated trucking company, which their presenter there told me that they're looking at going live in Texas relatively soon. We need to provide, if we want to start participating in those kinds of things, we need to provide a regulatory framework around them, and it's probably time for us to do that. I think we had a bill that I carried for MnDOT several years ago that didn't go anywhere because we had a few senators who thought that no semi-autonomous vehicle should be allowed on the road until it's first tried on a test track. And it's like, we were past that like 5 years ago. But I do think it's probably time for us to create a regulatory environment, because a lot of the companies who are doing the research and development basically won't come to your state unless there is a well-defined regulatory environment around it.
Yeah. Is there any thoughts on how you think about the infrastructure regulatory side of things?
One of the pieces that I think about, and I serve on the Capital Investment Committee, and so we travel the state and get different proposals as to physical buildings, facilities, roads, bridges that ought to be invested in. And I think one of the questions that we have to ask as legislators and just government officials is, what does this investment look like 10, 20, 30 years from now, given new technology? And I think, for example, especially when we think about mass transit, when we think about our roads, highways, port infrastructure, we just have to think about how this technology could change the operations in ways that maybe we don't anticipate today. And even if those use cases aren't occurring today, even if it's not necessarily something we're going to see in the next 5 years, I think as much as we can try to, I won't say future-proof because you can't future-proof, but make it future resilient, and make that infrastructure future resilient. I think that will provide a lot more value to the taxpayers, because then instead of having something that's obsolete in 10 years, maybe you can get another 20 years out of it if you're smart and think about those emerging technologies ahead of time. I also think that government has to have a lot of humility. I don't think, we're not the smart money in the room, right? We're not going to be able to pick what a lot of those innovations are going to be. And so having that flexibility to listening to people in industry on where they think these sectors are going is going to be really important to making sure we're making smart decisions for people.
Yeah, I think going back to the outcomes, not the process, right, or not the technology, thinking about setting up those containers and allowing it to change and update throughout. Great. Questions from the audience? Chris has got the mic again, so if you don't mind throwing your hand up, you can go there.
We answered all the questions.
I always say questions, feedback, or complaints, and then you usually
Absolutely.
get people raising hands.
Yeah.
And
that's a good
when I do
good
my town
addition.
halls,
Thank
that's
you.
what I say.
Yeah.
And then all the hands go up.
Yeah.
There we go.
Just making you get your steps in today if you haven't already. So this sort of ties the last panel with y'all. And so there had been mentioned the lens of safety, productivity, efficiency. We talked about the latter two a lot, but not the first one. And I think safety in that particular perspective meant safety of our transportation users, our drivers, our staff. But I'm really curious, marrying that with the local government perspective, what are the additional security concerns with respect to transportation specifically? I think that this is an emerging technology. There's a lot that we don't know. There's still a lot of bias. The people that build these tools are biased. Not everyone has good intentions, and even those who have good intentions might not always build a product that is giving us the outcomes that we intended to. So I'm just really curious about more of the philosophy behind this, any concerns that are emerging with respect to like how much we regulate the private sector's use of this when it comes to the public sector, just because we have very prominent figures who work in this area who are also involved in geopolitical. Like I will mention by name, not to skirt the issue, Elon Musk, right? We have government contracts with someone who's working in this area, but might not have the best interests for different people at heart. So I'm just curious, it's a very knotty, big question, but how do you choose who to work with? How do you choose to regulate additional use cases? If you can expand upon basically your entire panel, I would appreciate it. Thanks.
I say for you, I spent 15 years, 20 years in local government, so there are issues that this audience would be really interested in. Is how do we in the realm of connected and automated vehicles, how are the vehicles going to interact with the traffic controls, for example? And you already have auto manufacturers, asking for the specs on how to interact with the traffic light systems, so that to improve their own automated vehicle capabilities. And we know that discussing the realm of data security, that our small local governments, small local hospitals are the weak link in the chain, and so. Minnesota IT Services actually got a Techni Award from the Minnesota Technology Association this year for its work on cybersecurity. And a big part of the work, even though it's not actually legally part of their charter, is that they know that our small counties, small cities, small hospitals are the weak link, and they spend a lot of their time shoring up the local governments, trying to bring them within the fire firewalls, of the much stronger data security that the state has. That's going to be an ongoing issue that I can assure you is getting a lot of attention. And in terms of Elon, I drive one of his cars. It's 8 years old. I have no illusions that it's ever going to be able to drive itself with the hardware that is currently in the car. But yeah, you know, so the Mozilla Foundation has had a project called Privacy Not Included, and they evaluate different industries for their you know, the rigorousness of their data privacy and security standards. And they did one on the auto industry about a year or two ago, and they pronounced that the auto industry is has the worst privacy policies of any industry they had ever studied. And so, you know, Jen Caltriter at Mozilla did that study. I can't count her as a personal friend right now, but yeah, so as I was doing my privacy bill, and I was, you know, reading stories about how GM got caught with their fingers, you know, basically selling, you know, very personal data, you know, to insurance companies. You know, one car company was claiming that they could tell when people were having sex in the back seat, and I was trying to think, how would they do this? It must have something to do with the seatbelt sensors or something like that. But yeah, these companies are not going to respect your privacy unless we regulate it. So it was something that I actually have got, you know, one tweak I need to make to my bill this year. I'll have a technical corrections bill. But clearly the auto companies will not be allowed to sell locational data. But it's like, and we need to include accelerometer data as well, basically. If I'm going to word that, but because, you know, it's the starting, stopping, cornering is the data that they use to rate your skill as a driver, and that's there's a loophole in my bill that doesn't cover that yet.
Is there any thoughts on that?
I think especially when it comes to freight and to safety, having data to show outcomes is going to be really important. And I think, you know, people are going to be skeptical, right? Where you're like, oh, I have this, you know, AI tool that is going to improve safety, and it looks a little different than what we used to do previously. So I think having data to show the improvements are going to be important. I also think be prepared to get asked the question, how does this work? And I think that, you know, that's when we think about AI technology, it doesn't necessarily, it can't always explain itself. It can't always explain its outcomes. And so to be able to have AI that you can sit down and walk someone who's not a tech expert through and say, it gets this image data, it compares it to this database, here's how we've trained it, here's how it spots, and then here's on the back end how we test and learn and continue to make the capabilities better, I think will be really important. And then the other thing too that I think regulators will start asking around, especially the cybersecurity space, is so what if your tool goes down, right? And it was it was really interesting. I got to listen to a speech that the CEO of Delta Airlines gave recently, and, you know, they had a technology vendor who had a major, you know, cybersecurity incident. And, you know, one of the challenges they had was their fail-safe was extraordinarily manual, right? Yeah. And they had that backup, but it caused issues. And so, you know, that'll be the question I think we'll start asking is like, okay, your AI tool goes down, something happens, your vendor is having an issue. What's the backup plan to make sure that there's safety still for, you know, this really key piece of infrastructure? And how do you make sure that you don't shut America down and shut our supply chain down just because, you know, one minor, you know, relatively minor vendor had a cybersecurity issue?
Is that an example of a legislative potential requirement of saying we want to see everyone who's using these types of tools have this type of redundancy so there's not a supply chain disruption caused by that? Or
I think so, and I think we're seeing it across, you know, transportation, we're seeing it in energy, healthcare, where, you know, these tools are great, but they can also introduce some vulnerabilities as well, and making sure that there's a plan for if the electronic medical record goes down or the you know, rail safety system goes down, you know, what's the backup?
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have another question? Great.
Again, from a trucking perspective, you've mentioned cybersecurity and attacks and hacks, and one of the challenges I think from this group, from a supply chain challenge, is the interstate nature. We already identified that, and artificial intelligence is being used by very bad actors, as we've identified, and it's becoming increasingly more prevalent in transportation. We see it in trucking. I can't speak to rail or maritime, but they're using AI to impersonate, to pretend to be a fleet, to pretend to be a broker, to gather information. And one of the challenges that we have when these happen is because of its interstate nature, we don't know what law enforcement to go to. Which jurisdiction did it happen in? Where did it go? And one of the things I think that the supply chain could use is resources to law enforcement and to prosecutors to be able to pay attention and track these things down. I think when something bad happens like that and you're in a company, A, you don't want to tell the world it happened because it's embarrassing and it doesn't look good. But B, like, where do you go and where do you go to get help? And insurance companies have resources. So one of the things that we've been kicking around, so this is really for the benefit of the group, the retailers are looking at organized crime task force focused on retail, but seeing that expanded to supply chain. And again, I think the legislative interaction is, how do we provide resources to law enforcement and prosecutors so that when these things happen, it can be captured, reported, and I know at a federal level they're looking at trying to create a centralized database to capture this. But I'm curious from either of you to hear your thoughts on just that aspect of artificial intelligence, bad actors, and what we do in an interstate industry when bad things happen and we need help.
Yeah, I had this conversation with the Commerce Committee Chair Zach Stevenson, who is a prosecutor, just last week at TechNet, and we were talking about the case of cases of impersonation. And his conclusion was that we don't actually need new laws to make that illegal. It's already illegal under current laws. What we might need is better tools to help identify and catch the thieves. But clearly, impersonating someone using artificial intelligence, deep fakes, either visual or voice, is already illegal under anti-fraud law.
The one thing I'll add is if you were to go talk to the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension and say, okay, over the last 10 years, what has really increased in terms of things that you have to work on? And they would, cyber crimes is number one on the list. And I think, I like the idea of task force. If you go back to, serious drug trafficking, right? That's a international, federal, and state issue, local issue. And I think looking at how we can collaborate as a state with local partners, with federal partners to better prosecute those crimes, is going to be really important. One of the challenges about these crimes is that they're oftentimes not just out-of-state actors, but international, out-of-country actors that make it very challenging for justice to ever be served. And so I think one of the things that I'm really interested in, and Metro State actually has a really good cybersecurity program, is how can the state of Minnesota develop centers of excellence that can help both public entities and private entities increase their cybersecurity tools and capabilities, because I think that's, if we're really trying to bring down cybercrime, bring down the vulnerabilities, we just have to build better defenses. And we do have to go after bad actors, but it's becoming increasingly more challenging.
Yeah. Thanks, Bill. Is there one more?
Yeah, related to that, so my name is Mark Barron with Quetica, and my colleague Ben Zitlow. A couple of years ago, we worked on a project for the National Academy of Sciences looking at how to increase resiliency in transportation networks. And part of the work we did looked at cybersecurity issues. And I think there's a couple important things that we need to think about how we educate industry. So for instance, there's a whole series of what's called ISACs, Information Security Activity Centers. The trucking industry has one. The purpose of those sort of privately run groups is to inform when there's cyber attacks and how to prevent them. So there's a whole series of these by industry. The one thing we found is that state DOTs, for instance, didn't have their own ISAC, which seems sort of surprising. The other thing we looked at is the company we work for is a service-disabled veteran-owned organization that does a lot of work for DOD. And so every year, our employees have to go through data protection training online. You have to take about 2 one-hour courses and get a certificate that you understand how to handle sensitive and private data. And our recommendation was that that should be much more broad-based for like state DOTs, MPOs, and others. They should all go through that cybersecurity training so they understand at the very basic employee level things that can be done that can prevent cyber attacks. So just a couple suggestions, not really a question, but things that I think could help answer some of those questions, especially for small businesses. There's a lot of resources out there. We just, I think, need to figure out how to make people more aware of it.
Switching gears a little bit, Ron Dvorak with Duluth Cargo Connect. From the legislator's perspective, is there a clarity in the understanding of what freight is? And I bring up the question because a lot of times on queries, same-day deliveries or next-day deliveries, people don't perceive that as freight. So legislation gets written kind of lumping everything together without understanding the demands being placed or maybe the changes that are taking place in commerce. And maybe there's a need to review that.
Yeah, do you have an example of something where you think the law's not keeping up?
Probably the largest one that comes to mind is vehicle miles traveled. And everything gets lumped together in that. And what's happening in the industry now is that any same day or next day delivery, the volume of traffic in that is basically outstripping any potential gain because the public is demanding that kind of a service on a daily basis. And we're kind of running up against, conflicting goals there.
I almost say more because I think most of us are. I've got a package being delivered over the lunch hour today. I'm tracking it on my UPS app. But what do you think we should be doing?
Well, is there clarity in, first of all, what freight is?
I think so.
Is that one of the same categories, kind of like we've been talking with AI? I mean, it seems to me that from where we're going to be talking about this at CTS all year in 2025, it's one of those, freight, there's a big container of what freight could be, and then there are those different use cases. It
may not be normal. I've been working in transportation my whole life, but I think there's people, we had a whole bill, last session about delivery charges.
I do think, though, but whether it's legislators or the public, a lot of folks don't understand how complicated these supply chains are, right? To them, it's okay, UPS dropped this box off at my office or at my home, but might not understand all the different partners and complexities it goes through. And I think, that's something that there's always an educational opportunity there.
Yeah, but I know that my package originated in El Paso, Texas at 9:37 a.m. yesterday morning.
Well, I will say, we're going to do a Freight 101 whole series, and the start. This is just shameless plugging at this point for the thing. But I think, Ron, the questions you're asking are going to be a great fodder for those discussions too, because part of what we're going to be highlighting throughout the year is exactly that. How much outside of this room, how much are people thinking about what it means to have a package delivered to them the next day? How to get it from El Paso to here in a matter of hours, right? So lots to explore for sure. I think we have maybe one more question. Here.
Hi, I'm Robin Hutchison. I've worked at both the local and the federal level, and most recently was heavily engaged in thinking about the regulation, so I was going to switch gears here, of autonomous trucking. And I'm curious, from your perspective, how helpful is having federal regulatory guideposts on something like autonomous trucking, and how much does that, how helpful is it to have the federally regulated guideposts for an industry like that, given its interstate travel, or how frustrating is it for you as state legislators to have a federal approach to it? Hard question. Sorry, someone just said wow in the audience.
I think, to me, it depends on what those guidelines are, right? And like, for example, you could imagine, Congress deciding we don't want any autonomous vehicles and we're going to, outlaw it, right? But then on the other hand, you could say we're going to preempt all the states and have, no regulatory framework, no guidelines. We're just going to permit and allow it to happen. And so I think, all else equal, interstate commerce being regulated by the federal government makes sense. But I also think that you have to make sure it's a robust framework that allows for innovation while also meeting consumer and the public's expectations around things like safety, data privacy, all those pieces. And so it's kind of, and that can be one of the struggles too, is we might want the federal government to take action on something, but in our minds, they're taking the action that we want them to take, right? And so that can be some of the challenges. And I think here, one of the benefits we've had from the laboratories of democracy is that we can see, the trip that Steve took in LA earlier. I don't think that's legal in Minnesota, right? There's not necessarily a legal framework around that, and so we can learn from other states and try to adopt that. And I think the same could apply to the federal government.
Yeah, what I would say, based on my conversations with people in the industry, is that companies like Waymo or Aurora probably aren't going to bring their vehicles to your state unless they understand what the regulatory framework is that is going to govern it. So they're, if Michigan has a law that has guidelines for for how automated vehicles operate on their roadways, and Minnesota doesn't, then those companies are going to do their cold weather, snowy testing in Michigan and not in Minnesota.
It's barely cold in Michigan. Geez.
Yeah.
Well, please join me in thanking the senator and representative for this great talk. And appreciate both your leadership in thinking through this with your colleagues, and I'm sure there'll be more to come. So with that, I'm going to ask Gina to come back up. I think.
Yes, and I'll just make my comments from down here. So first of all, again, thank you everyone for participating in today's symposium, and again to our speakers and panelists. I think this was really helpful and informative, so appreciate your attendance today. So later today or tomorrow or Monday at the latest, you will get a request for an evaluation of today's event. So really encourage you to please fill that out, because the planning committee does look at the results of those surveys to identify how we can improve this event, and as well as looking for topics. And Kyle stole a little bit of my thunder when he started talking a little bit about our focus on freight in 2025. So for the past 2 years, CTS has had a theme for the calendar year. We started with Future of Mobility in 2023, and then in this for 2024, it's been Rural Needs Statewide Answers. And so we try to focus some of our research activity as well as our stakeholder engagement and events around that topic. And for 2025, drum roll, it is going to be Unpacking Freight from Producers to Front Doors. So we're really going to be spending this year in 2025 taking a closer look at freight issues, opportunities, and challenges in Minnesota, and looking at where the university has the opportunity to contribute in those conversations, as well as if there are opportunities for additional research to be done in that space. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about what we have planned, but look for more information to be coming out soon, and particularly in January when we officially launch the theme for the year, and we welcome your ideas and participation throughout the year in these particular conversations. So with that, as you go on your way today, please travel safe. We all hope you have a wonderful holiday season, and we will see you in 2025.